please.
Mayor Barrett,
Here.
Council Members Barnacle,
Yes, here.
Fisher,
Here.
Healy,
Here.
King,
Here.
McDonald,
Here.
Hosike.
Here.
All members are present.
Thank you, and we will now have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, I usually will mention that we have Spanish translators available, but we seem to be having technical difficulty getting our translators online. So once we have that happen, someone from the staff will interrupt and we will make that information available to our Spanish language members in the audience. So with that, we are going to go on to the workshop, and this is the fourth public hearing for district-based elections pursuant to Election Code Section 10010. So I'm going to ask our City Attorney, Eric Danley, to kick it off.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Council.
Eric, can I interrupt you really quick?
Go
I
ahead,
think
Ingrid.
I think Martina's here. I see his name. So if we want to let him just introduce how to participate in Spanish, then we'll open that channel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Martin?
And hello, everyone. Thank you. Sorry, there's some miscommunication here with the Zoom link. Bienvenidos a todos y a todas. Mi nombre es Martín Rivarola. La sesión, el taller de esta noche va a ser traducido simultáneamente al español para usted poder sumarse y escuchar todo lo que se va a decir en la noche de hoy en español. Lo que le pedimos es que busque en la parte de abajo de su pantalla donde está el globo. Ahí usted aprieta donde dice Interpretation y le va a salir español. Usted con eso va a poder escuchar toda la sesión de hoy en español. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll turn it back to our City Attorney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So once again, good evening, council members, staff colleagues, members of the public. As the mayor indicated, we're here in the fourth public hearing to receive community input on voting districts to be established for city council elections pursuant to the California Voting Rights Act. I'm going to touch base briefly on some of the high points of what's in the staff report and agenda materials that are before us and have been posted to the city's website. And I'll talk and those materials track to the extensive presentation that will be offered to the council and the public tonight. And I'll make some introductions as to the staff, the key staff, and the presenter that are going to be offering that. So first, just to touch on briefly what's been provided in the staff report and our purpose tonight. The purpose is to receive the presentation, which provides detail regarding a total of 23 voting district map alternatives that were published on February 4th and 3 maps submitted after February 4th. And we're going to be seeking direction from the council tonight on majority consensus items regarding preferred maps going forward and map features going forward as we prepare to provide those to the council and in preparation for having maps that meet the publication requirements under the Voting Rights Act, and that the council will then be in a position to choose from and adopt as part of the city's districting ordinance. So in the staff report, we provided detail about the really extensive public outreach that has been managed by our Economic Development and Open Government Director, Ingrid Alverde, and her team. We also included an updated schedule for the remainder of our activity related to the city's transition to district elections. And the key upcoming dates, I'll just mention briefly, tonight is obviously is the fourth hearing to review draft maps. On February 23rd, that will be the deadline for submitting maps for staff analysis and council consideration and possible adoption. Maps submitted after that point won't meet the publication deadline or the time for staff to review them in accordance with the Voting Rights Act. They can be submitted as public comment, but they won't be able to be analyzed or acted upon by the council. Then the posting of the second round of draft maps on March 7th will be public hearing number 5, the second round review of draft maps. Final maps will be posted March 11th. Then on March 21st will be the first reading of the districting ordinance, which will also address sequencing of district elections and provide some other details for a new district elections chapter in the municipal code. And April 4th will be the second reading of that ordinance, which will then take effect 30 days thereafter. And those dates are all in accordance with the California Voting Rights Act requirements. So we summarized in the staff report the summaries that of the community of interest information that members of the public had submitted, and also summaries of and graphics of community maps that are organized by families according to similarities they have in terms of their focus areas in the city, and they're organized. These materials are organized the same way in the more extensive presentation that you'll be receiving, and it's time to get to that presentation. And so providing us that is Chris Chaffee with Redistricting Partners, who's been instrumental in and actively involved in preparation of our maps and also analysis of the maps submitted by members of the public. So we're fortunate to have him offering us the presentation tonight. Also joining us is Tom Willis with Olson Remshow, our outside districting council. We have the staff with us, including Peggy Flynn, our city manager, and Ingrid, our economic development and open government director, along with me, Dylan in my office, Dylan Brady, and Tom to answer questions. And I think, Chris, if you want to then bring up the slide presentation, there's the slide listing the topics that'll be covered tonight: redistricting principles, consideration of racial demographics in creating districts, communities of interest information informing the maps, the draft map A2 that the council directed be provided, and then next steps. I'm going to cover the first couple slides, which address some legal issues, and then Chris will take it over from there. And I believe the mayor is going to ask council members, feel free to ask questions over the course of Chris's presentation to make sure we're able to address them while the topics are pertinent. So the first slide addresses the California Fair Maps Act provisions governing the drawing of district maps. And they're listed there in the bullets. The districts have to be substantially equal in size, as required by the federal constitution, and that's based on people, not merely citizens. They have to be contiguous. They should be connected. They should respect communities of interest, and we'll talk a lot more about information that's been received from members of the public about what those communities of interest that are important to them are. They have to be, the districts have to be easily identifiable and understandable and follow natural boundaries. They have to be reasonably compact to the extent practicable. If you go to the next slide, please, Chris. Thank you. So, and this is important, and it's a bit of a nuance, but it's an important one, and that is considering minority demographics and voting patterns was necessary to determine whether the city ought to convert to district elections in satisfaction of the California Voting Rights Act requirements. But now that that decision has been made by the council and we're well into that process and are focused on district formation, it's important to note that voting districts cannot be based on racial demographics. They have to be based instead on those Fair Maps Act factors that we just looked at in the prior slide. So if there are further questions about that from the council, I'd be happy to address them now, and Tom can assist. But otherwise, if there are none, then I think we can hand over the presentation.
Eric, this is the mayor.
Thank you.
Let me just see if anybody does have a question about that. As I'm hearing you and reading this, what you're saying is that it really doesn't, it is not something that we can take into consideration what the percentage of one race or another is in any district we put together?
That's correct. The district should not be formed based on that. They should be formed on considerations of communities of interest and the other criteria that were on the prior slide.
Right.
And then that's in accordance with the requirements of the Federal Voting Rights Act. I see Councilmember Posake has his hand raised.
Okay, so let me just follow up before I go to Vice Mayor Posake.
Sure.
So why, if we are being directed to go to district elections based on the California Voter Protection Act, are there any rules in that California particularly has about district elections that are different from the federal law, and wouldn't they supersede that, since that is what is moving this action on our part?
No, the contrary is true, Madam Mayor, because if there were inconsistencies between the state law and the federal law would preempt. And it's a constitutional restriction that prevents the drawing of district boundaries based on race. If you recall, and Tom, please feel free after I conclude this answer to add to it or correct as you see fit. If you recall, the purposes of the California Voting Rights Act is to do away with discrimination in voting, and to support the ability of protected class voters to elect candidates of their choice. But that's a different thing from forming districts based on race. So Tom, I don't know if you'd want to amplify or clarify that answer.
Okay, if he doesn't right now, I'm not seeing his hand up, and I'm not seeing him on my screen. We'll go to, okay, you do have your hand up. Please, go ahead.
Thanks,
No,
Frank.
I was just going to, sorry, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to answer any questions, Eric, but I think you answered that, perfectly well, but I'm here to help in any way I can.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
So let's go to Vice Mayor Posake, followed by Councilmember McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had a question that I wanted to get out of the way early in terms of this contiguous criteria, and whether that thin strip of city land between the outlet malls and Corona on the west side of the highway, whether, if that's the only connection between two parts of a map, would that be susceptible to challenge on the basis of the contiguous criteria? Can anybody answer that?
Let me take a look at the graphic. I can see. Councilmember Posake, are you referring to any specific map or maps with respect to that question? Like A2 or something?
Let me see here. Map EPA would be one that does this.
EPA. Okay, I see
For
EPA.
District 5, you see, has a connection only by that narrow strip of land between the outlet mall and Corona. The District 5 includes.
Oh, I see. I
Yeah.
see. Well, I'm interested, Tom, if you see this differently. You're right. That's a narrow connection, but it's continuous. There's no
Mhm.
island, or it's kind of like an isthmus, I guess you would say. But that part of the city, with the way it's addressed in the map EPA, That's a relatively narrow portion, and the other two districts to the east are contiguous and compact. There's still kind of a peninsula coming off of District 2. But I don't know, Tom, do you see?
I'm not
something-
trying to push it any which way. I'm just asking.
My sense is that it is contiguous, but I don't know, Chris, is there any possibility of you just showing that EPA map very quickly? We can
Just a second.
make sure everyone sees it.
Thanks, Chris. This could be a useful exercise to just show what's meant by the terms.
If not, I can share it. I can share my screen. It's just Chris doesn't have
I
it.
believe
we
this
go.
is the EPA map, right?
That's the one.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah. So is that 101? That would be contiguous, even if it's very, very narrow, because it is not meeting at a point. The definition of contiguity in the Fair Maps Act is that it's not contiguous if it only meets at a point. And here it looks like, and Chris, you're the expert here, so I don't know if you
Yeah,
can
I
check. that, but
agree.
It's not functionally contiguous in the sense that you can't literally probably walk that on 101, but you can drive it. It's just you can't, get right off. But it looks like that is 101, right, Chris?
It's 101, and I would say it's both functionally contiguous because you can use the highway to drive from the north side to the south side of the district.
Yeah.
And then it's not point contiguous, which is specifically outlawed in the Fair Maps Act, where you just have an edge of 2 census blocks touching.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I think it is contiguous. It's obviously a narrow bridge there, but it would meet the Fair Maps Act requirement.
Okay, I just want to be sure of that early on. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now let's go to Councilmember McDonald.
Thank you very much. My question is, there are 2 data sets that support each map showing total population and CVRA population. But I've gotten several calls on this. It seems that in all this, there's the total populations, percent populations aren't shown on those sheets. And I'd like a reminder of what especially the Latinx city population percentages and CVRA is. Several people have pointed out that 18 seems to be a high percentage number on the CVRA Latinx, and why isn't there a majority district? Could we recap what those 2 population percentages are?
Councilmember McDonald, do you mean by district or do you mean total in the city?
Total. Each of the districts is clearly identified
Okay.
for that, but then you don't get to a whole. People say, well, what's the whole? Is it average of 15%, and so 18 is gray, or is there really a majority district anywhere? And I know the answer is there's not a majority, but if we could just have the aggregate number, the big number.
Does anybody, Ingrid, do you have that, or Chris, do you have that? It's certainly true. I want to be clear for everyone attending that we've concluded based on the demographic analysis that it's not possible to create a majority minority district in the city of Petaluma, which would be something that it is important to know in terms of compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. But I don't know if we've got the total demographic. I know we do somewhere.
I do. So the total population of the city under the prison reallocated census data from the statewide database is 59,846 people. And so the 2 different data sets, the first one, where it says 2020 census, is the 2020 census after the prison reallocated population has been taken out and reallocated to their residency prior to incarceration. The citizen and voting age population, which is the second data set on the data field or the data page, that's a data set that we use to verify if we can get to a majority minority district under the Federal Voting Rights Act. It's a data set specifically created by the Census Bureau for the Department of Justice to do that compliance check and for many other things.
So,
and so I'll get to the total. So the total population on the Latino CVAP population is 13.5%. The total Asian citizen voting age population is 3.8%, and the Black CVAP is 1.3%. So those are the three protected classes under the Federal Voting Rights Act that have a concentration in the city of Petaluma.
Do you have that number for the census data for those three classes as well?
Sure. For Latino, the percentage is 22.8%. For Asian, it's 4.7%. And for Black, it's 1.3%.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank
Tom,
you.
did you want to add to that answer, or is your hand just?
Yeah, that was good.
Okay,
Thank you.
if you want to take your hand down, Tom, that would be good. Thank you. It's still up though. Okay, so Mike Healy, Councilmember Healy.
Thank you. So two things. I'm not sure if these need to be answered right now, but I'd like to have them answered during the course of the presentation. The first one is, it's not obvious to me how draft map A2 differs from draft map A we looked at the previous meeting. And I'd appreciate knowing how that is. And then relatedly, at least two of us commented last time that we would like population disparities between the different proposed precincts be reduced. And last time it was 8%, it's still 8%. So that seems to be something that wasn't a priority for staff and consultants to address. So I'd like to understand the thinking on that. Thank you.
So the changes from A to A2 is the addition of the SMART district. Sorry, I'm looking for the specific
With
language.
the addition of the Corona
The
Station.
Corona Station.
Thank you, the
property.
Corona Station, yeah. Was it added in?
So that has a population currently of 0. Was there anything done to address the population disparities between the different districts?
No.
Okay, well, thanks for that.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Barnacle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I really appreciate the work that went in between these meetings. My question is on, it's one of the attachments, I think it's attachment 3. Yeah, so it's attachment 3, community maps. And then there was 3 community maps that were submitted via email to us. And it didn't look like they used the redistricting partners program to develop the maps. And it was interesting, they identified schools and parks and development projects underway. And my question is, is the data that they included with that for population disparity and things, is all that accurate? Have we confirmed that? It's unclear what tool they used and if it's accurate.
I believe they they use a different program, and one of the things we're doing in this presentation is we're going through all the ESRI maps that have been submitted, all the hand-drawn maps, and those 3 community maps, just so everyone, the public and the council, can see the public submissions and kind of what we like to think of them as, like map schools, so that use certain themes. And I believe that the maps you're referring to are fairly accurate with their numbers. So if you're interested, once we get towards the end, if you're interested in taking one of those maps and kind of elevating it to a draft map, we'll take it in, we'll draw it into Maptitude, and we'll verify all the populations and the demographic information, so that it will be before you for the next hearing.
Okay, thank you. I have one more question. It feels like it would be nice if we could call on, if there's people in the audience who created these maps and we have questions about why they wanted something a certain way, it might be helpful for us to elevate members of the public to speak to their maps more than just like a public comment, because certainly there's a lot of thought that went into those. And if we do pick out a map or two that we want to elevate, it might be good for us to sort of hear some of the thinking that went into it versus just us talking about it. Is that possible?
Yes, that is possible, and that is my intention, was that once we get to council comments or questions about any of the individual maps other than A2, that if the maker of that map or makers of those maps are in the audience, we would be able to have them raise their hand and then join the conversation at that time, and keep being allowed to be questioned or having comments from them from the council. So
Fantastic. Thank you.
thank you
That's all
for
for
bringing
me.
that up. Okay, and Councilmember King?
Yeah, I have a question about, as we go through the presentation and we're going through each of these individual maps, if there's any of these maps that were submitted from the public that are in the view of our retained consultants or legal counsel to be outside of compliance. I don't know if that's something you can tell us right out of the gate, because it would seem to me that those are not maps we want to consider at the moment or at any point, given the stage of review we're in. So it was difficult, I don't have that information handy, but if it's possible, that would be very helpful.
So I think that would be Chris Chaffee, or
Yeah.
maybe, yes, I think you're the one who is that expert.
So one of the things that we like to try to do when we're going through these kind of draft map discussions is, instead of thinking of something as compliant or non-compliant, think about the themes that you want, that you like, that come out. So maybe you like the use of Highway 101 as a border, or you want to keep the McDowell corridor together, or you like using the Sonoma Parkway Eli division, or East Washington, or whatever community of interest that comes forward in a map, and you identify and say, I really like this portion of the map. What we can then do is try as best we can to provide you that draft map that is fully compliant with the Fair Maps Act criteria that your council went through at the beginning of this meeting, so that you can basically use the idea coming forward from the public as the baseline, and we can make sure that it's legally compliant and checks all the boxes.
Thanks, Chris. It seems to me that most, the vast majority of the maps submitted by members of the public have a CVRA compliant population balancing. I thought there were maybe 2 or 3 that did not. So as to the total population balancing, I think that's the case. Am I remembering correctly, Chris? And are you able to flag those when we get to them?
Most of the maps were within that 10% total deviation. And I think if even the ones that are maybe beyond 10%, there would be probably a way to make them under the threshold if the council was really interested in kind of the architecture of the districts that were presented by the public.
Thank you. And that goes a little bit to Councilmember Healy's point that he raised earlier about population balancing. We did hear from a couple of council members that they wanted to make that balancing finer, but we weren't sure if that was majority direction. So we're going to be doing some straw polling tonight to make sure we have the majority direction on those issues. And as you can see, there can be a tension between, making the population balancing more fine and potential conflicts with communities of interest that are being sought to be preserved. So we'll see what the council direction is with respect to those, with the different sort of maps and map features. Thank you.
Thank you. And this does seem to be the meeting where we are going to be asking the council to pick the word architecture of these districts. And so because there is room for potential change, hopefully during this meeting, I can see why the work wasn't done to make that balance, because I was someone who asked for that as well. But I definitely understand that now is the time going forward where we will, close up those gaps between the districts. So Councilmember McDonald.
Thank you very much. Probably more on that exact theme. I appreciate Mr. Danley's recap of the schedule, and looking at the report on for March 11th, it says post-final maps. And I was just hoping we could get a statement of clarity for tonight's goal and next meeting. On the 11th, are we intending to have, at that point, several maps still in play?
If that's the council's wish, absolutely.
It's still an allowable at that point.
Sure. The key is, though, that will be the last time when we can be presenting new maps that the council will be in a position to approve in the introduction of the ordinance of the 21st. So that's why we're trying to move closer to that tonight by focusing in on the features that the council still would like to see reflected in maps that maybe haven't been prepared as yet.
Thank you. It's just kind of pointing out that there's still a lot of latitude and a lot of crafting here. Yes, thanks.
Thank you.
But there is no meeting on the 11th. The 11th is strictly just, that's when the maps need to be published for the public record in advance of the meeting on the 21st.
Right. Really the last opportunity to get council direction is going to be on the 7th.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Just so we're all on the same page on these dates. Okay, so I think now, unless the city attorney has anything more to say, I think he's going to turn it over to Chris Chaffee. But what I would like to do is let the presentation go forward. And, you know, if there seems to be a place where it would be a good place for council to ask some questions, perhaps you could pause and do that. If we just have so many questions that we're like, wait, you can't go forward until we get this question asked. Council, just raise your hand, and if I see enough hands go up, we're just going to take a stop and ask some questions. But otherwise, please try and you know, think of us in terms of questions, just in summing up to where you are. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank
So
you.
I think it's time for us to hear from Chris. Chris, thanks for being here tonight and all for all your work on the districting analysis. So to you.
Thank you, Mr. Denley, and the council and Madam Mayor. My name is Chris Chaffee. I'm from Redistricting Partners and helped craft the draft maps that were presented to you last time. And I just wanted, in this slide, talk through how we went from the community of interest, which we always call COI, and I'm sorry for us using the abbreviation, but from the COI submissions to those draft maps. One of the things that we really try to focus on is letting the community speak through the draft maps that we present. So the draft maps that were presented started from the numerous community of interest forms and worksheets and emails that were submitted, in addition to the Esri maps, the hand-drawn maps, and any way that the community reached out and presented something to the council, we tried to incorporate in some way into the draft maps that were presented to you in the prior meeting. And at that meeting, and we'll talk about A2 towards the end, but we really tried to bring that community of interest testimony forward through those draft maps. And I think the other thing that just to underline is that this process is really about making choices and making changes as we go. It's very iterative. So the draft maps really are the starting point of that discussion, and for both the council and the public to come forward and say, hey, we really like this element of map A, or we really like the element of B, of these district construction. And then going forward, keep making better and better drafts that more conform to the comments that are made by the public and the input from the council. So that at the end of the day, when we get to that final meeting, maybe it's not a perfect map, but many people enjoy it or like it and think it's a fair way to represent the city of Petaluma in this new district by district election system. So I just wanted to kind of start the meeting with those themes by pulling out these 6 themes that we really saw come forward through both the worksheets and the public map submissions. The first one was the Washington Street corridor, so that's East 101 area. That was discussed in a lot of the community of interest testimony, and a lot of it discussed that this was the larger Latino population of the city. It's multifamily, dual immersion schools. That was kind of the core of that idea. The second community of interest piece was that there was the Heritage District in downtown, that people are committed to preserving the historic character of those communities. The third was the idea of east of 101, south of Madison, which is bordered by the Sonoma Mountain Parkway / Ely Road. That was a community of interest that should be preserved and united within a district. The fourth community of interest piece of testimony, and something that you'll see in a lot of the maps, is Petaluma High School area. That there's a lot of community of interest surrounding the school, that there's also traffic, public safety, and growth issues. The fifth was the rural west side, that area that's has interests around crops and animal and apiary, and has that nexus to the unincorporated areas around the city, should be also preserved in the district. The sixth idea, or that really came forward, and these are not all of the community of interest pieces of testimony. I don't want to minimize it, but we tried to pull out the biggest themes, was the surrounding areas around the Adobe Creek Golf Course. And that, as it's non-operational at this point, that it's causing some concerns within the community, and that community wants to have a voice when we draw district lines. So from those communities of interest testimonies, those are kind of the themes, but then we wanted to go further to be able to show the council and the public that when we created the draft maps, A, B, and C, we tried to group community of interest statements and maps and communities into each district within each of those maps. And so this chart really tries to outline all of the communities of interest within each district, within each map. I'm not going to go through them point by point, but we just wanted to underline and magnify that we really heard from the community, and we tried our best to show that in these maps. So now we're going to dive into the community of interest submissions, the map submissions. So there have been 22 submitted maps through the online mapping tool. There's been 4 physical maps submitted. And then we also, I think today, got 2 additional submissions that we have available, and we can bring up if the person that submitted them would like to discuss them. So what we've done with these 26 maps is we put them into what we call mapping schools. And the idea is that there are major themes that we see in each of the map submissions that we then could use to create an architecture for your district maps. And some of them, like there are 4 mapping schools that we've really identified. Some of them would be compatible to make into an architecture. Some of them would not be. And so one of the things that you can use, if you like the ideas of these schools, is talking about, I really want to see 101 used as a dividing line, or I really want to have East Petaluma as a district. So let me go into now the mapping school. So one of the ideas is we've got the East Petaluma subdivisions. Now you can see these 6 maps all use the Sonoma Parkway, Ely Boulevard as a border, and they create this east side Petaluma district. And almost all of these first 5 they go all the way across the city. And you can see in the sixth one, they vary from that line. But that's a theme that's come forward in these 6 maps. And so what I was going to do is just kind of run through these maps so that you can see how similar in a lot of ways they are. And we can stop if you want to dive into any of these, or we can keep going through the themes. So the second theme is using Highway 101 as a divider between districts. And you can see in these 6 maps that 101 creates kind of a north-south split of the districts, with often 3 districts fully above the 101 and 3 districts mostly below the 101. You can see that there is some wraparound, right, above the 101 in one district normally, where you have, even with 101 being used as a split, you still have some movement between the two, the north and the south side. The third mapping school, and it's something that was kind of discussed, I think with the first question tonight, was this idea of North 101 being used as a district and put in wholly together, where you don't have that question of contiguity because they've unified that area altogether. So it's not just linked by 101. It's all the area around it is unified. So that's one way of not having to worry about the question of, is it functionally contiguous to connect 2 parts of the city based on Highway 101 alone. These maps really solve that question by just uniting the whole area. So I'm just going to run through those. And then the final school is using the river as a divider. You can see that in these 3 maps. You also saw it in some of the other maps I've already presented, where that creates a natural border between districts, and numerous people have used that as the dividing line kind of between a southern district and a waterfront district. So those are the 3 maps, those public maps. So that's, and then, sorry, and the last one is the South Petaluma subdivision, where you can see that there has been a submission in Esri of just one district saying that this is the perfect Southern Petaluma district that should be used going forward. And you can see that there's all of these are very similar in their construction. They might have slightly different arms or appendages. Like this one has this area that goes out. Some of them are a lot more compact along the edge, but that the main concept is putting that community together in one district. So those are the 22 Esri submissions that we've received to date. But there's also 4 hand-drawn maps that have been submitted. And I think what we like to see is that there's not a huge difference between the themes the public is using if they're drawing by hand or if they're drawing online. With these 4, you can see some of the elements of the schools we just talked through. You can see in this one, you have, well, here, I'll just go through. You have 101 used as a border. You also have the Southern Petaluma theme come forward. In this one again, you have the Sonoma Parkway, Eli Drive, or Eli Boulevard, excuse me, line, creating that East Petaluma district in District 4. In this district, again, you see a Southern Petaluma district formed And you'll see this in the 3 public map submissions that were done in a different mapping program. You'll see the McDowell area united together and 101 all together, or north of 101 all together. And this is, I think you can see, probably submitted by the same person. So you see a lot of the same elements of the other map in the second map, except now you see a division of South Petaluma, but you still see that McDowell corridor connected and the North 101 community whole. So I think these are the next 3 maps are the ones that Councilmember Barnacle pointed out. These were submitted through a different system. I don't actually think, I think I once said it was Esri, and I think I've misspoken because I don't think this is an Esri product, but you can still see that these deviations are quite good, only at 2.8%. And they're, from our review, they're very close. We just need to digitize these if you would like one of these brought forward, and we can make sure that they're, you know, all their populations match our internals. But you can see with this version, I guess it's called Idea Consolidation 1, that they again use the river. Well, they unify the river in their district. They don't use it as a border. They also put Midtown and Downtown together in C, and use Highway 101 as a dividing line with most of 101, North 101 in one district. And they also, what they use, the terminology of the McDowell corridor is all united in District E. This map is similar in kind of architecture. You can see, except that, oops, in 2, the D is kind of moved up. McDowell's and 101 is not used as a dividing line. You can also see that you have a South Petaluma district created, and 101, instead of being used on the northern, for the northern districts as a line, it's used kind of on the east side of the city, and that's used to create a District B. And that total deviation is 3%. In their final map, Idea Consolidation number 3, you can see that South Petaluma district, using the river as its dividing line, is here. And you've got the McDowell corridor united again. You have you have all of 101 North in one district, like in some of the other maps. One thing you don't see in either of these 3 is you don't see that Sonoma Mountain Parkway, Eli Boulevard dividing line. So you have a split of East Petaluma. So I don't know if now is a good time to pause for questions, or I can also move forward into map A2 and go over some of the descriptions of that map, and looking at a couple overlays that we think help explain kind of the construction.
Okay, let me see if anybody on the council has any questions about what we have seen so far. Not seeing any hands, so I think you can go ahead and we'll hold our.
So, thank you, Madam Mayor. Draft map A2 is very slight alteration from map A. The only change was moving the Corona station, the smart station, from District D to E. So, oops. So one of the things we wanted to do, and I want to really thank Ingrid for helping on this slide, and is point out some of the communities of interest that were housed in each of the districts of Plan A2. You can see like District A You've got the airport neighborhoods, East Washington corridor, etc. In B, you've got the Eastern Washington corridor and Redwood neighborhood, and the east side of Petaluma. I'm just going to go clockwise. And F, you have that southern Petaluma district that we've seen in a lot of the maps and was one of those schools of thought. In District C, you've got the west side, Valley Vista, you've got parts of downtown. And then in E, you've got the rural west side, you've got the unification of the 101 area, and the McDowell corridor that you saw from those public submissions. And then finally in D, you have the east side Petaluma and as well. So the other thing we wanted to do is provide A2 with a couple overlays that we think helps identify some of the ideas behind these maps. This is the floodplain overlay. And you can see that two districts in this architecture really have the flood issues or concerns. And that's, of course, District F, which have the waterfront and the river in it. And then the Northern District and District E has a lot of the floodplain concerns kind of concentrated in those two districts so that they can be represented well on the council. The other thing that came up in the last meeting, but also came through in a lot of the COI forms submitted, was the idea that everyone wanted a number of parks within each district. And so what we've done is we've taken the great layer that your GIS department provided us of all the parks in the city, and then map them with the proposed district lines in black. So you can see pretty much every park, except for some, I guess, on the north side, they're so neat together. Every park identified and colored, so that you can see that there is a pretty good distribution of parks throughout this plan in each district. The other thing that came up a lot was the idea that the schools are so important to the community. And I think one thing that we acknowledge as a mistake, or that we could change if interested, is the idea around Petaluma High School. You can see that this proposed draft line splits the high school with most of it in F, but a little bit, a portion of the campus in C. So I think with a very slight alteration, that error could be corrected if the council was interested. But what most of the districts, again, have, I think, actually, let me rephrase, all the districts have schools in them. It's not completely equally distributed, but it's close. And then, yes, on the total deviation. So this is at the total deviation of A2 is at 7.8%. This is well under the 10% total deviation that the courts have provided local agencies to use as a tool to keep communities of interest together and to abide by the other criteria articulated and outlined in the Fair Maps Act.
Okay, can we wait 1 second? I see Councilmember Barnacle has his hand up. Do you want to jump in now?
Yeah, can you go back to the parks overlay, please?
Sure.
You said that there was good parks, or there was just distribution of parks, but I guess I'm seeing it now. Okay, thank you. Never mind. I couldn't see the color in District B.
Yeah,
I guess
it's
there's
kind
just
of
a lot of smaller parks that are there.
exactly
That's helpful. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So now what's next is really hearing from the council and the public and the mayor. I'm sorry, I don't mean to, but hearing from all of you about what you think of draft map A2, what changes you'd like to be made, and or what other kind of architectures you're interested in seeing as draft maps? And additionally, are you interested in elevating one of the public maps that have been submitted and making changes to that, or just having us basically make it a draft map, elevate it up to a draft map without any changes?
Okay, thank you. I think then this is a good time for us to call on anyone in the public attending the Zoom meeting who is the author of one of the maps, who would like to speak to that map. And it's also a good time for anybody on the council who has a map that they are particularly interested in to see if there is anybody willing to speak on about that map as well. So people in attendance, if you are a map author, please raise your hand. And while people are getting ready to do that, I'm going to call on council members who might have issues or questions or comments. Councilmember Fisher.
No issues or comments, but I did want to call out on page A31 a map called Districting Plan that I was particularly drawn to. And just, I'll save my architecture comments until the next round.
And did you say that was on page 31 of the staff report?
Correct, yes.
Okay, and does it have an author? Or?
It's just called Districting Plan.
I know that, I'm sure they seemed so unique when people were putting them together, but all of a sudden they all sound the same. Is this the map you had? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, and what I'm particularly drawn to, I guess I can talk about architecture a little bit, is that I view our fairgrounds as being sort of the central axis in our community, and would like to see the districts sort of represent that. And I think this one does. Obviously, one doesn't touch it, but I don't like the architecture of the maps that have that Sonoma Mountain Parkway and Eli as the divider, creating that real east side district. I'd rather see the districts be more diverse in going from the 101 to the east.
Okay, thank you. And those are really good points for us to start our conversation about where we are on this. Since we're looking at maps of interest, I also would like to bring up idea consolidation 1. And what I like about that map, I don't think any of these maps is perfect, but I don't think perfection is achievable. But what I do like about this map is that it keeps the Midtown whole. And almost no other maps do that in a way that I think is respecting that section of our town, which I think is really evolving a very particular identification. And it does that, it would include, in my mind, the fairgrounds in that area. But everything to the freeway and including associating that with downtown. So that's just something I'd like to throw out there. And I see Councilmember King has his hand up. So let's hear from you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. While we're talking about maps that we looked at that, I would like to see maybe come back for consideration, I'll start with the map A2, which I definitely would want to see come back in some form. I don't know if I was one of the people who was clear in the last meeting, but I'd like to see more population balance in that map in some way. The deviation seemed a bit much, and it seems to me one of the things that's important to me is that the broad population of each of these districts is as close as we reasonably can get to equal. So that would be one thing I would like to see adjusted in that map. Another comment in general, before I get to the other maps I like, is we do have these dividers, but the freeway and the river, among others. I think it's going to be very difficult. I think we can factor them in to some degree, but I think it's going to be difficult to really have 6 districts that are on one side or the other of each of these big dividers. It's not going to. I mean, looking at map A2, you can see District E, District F are on each, have sections on each side of the freeway, for example. The same with the river and some of the other dividers as well. So that would be my comment on A2. With regard to the maps that we reviewed in the staff report and tonight, I too like the 3 digitized colored maps that came in at the end. I'll just make a general comment on the maps themselves. They were very easy to read based on, well, the color is nice, but also the landmarks. The overlays that were in the staff report were very helpful, where you had parks and you had schools. This map added a few more things, but something to give the public and the council a quick look at, where these dividers are in terms of, streets and landmarks. It also had, looking at idea consolidation, one, it also has probably most of the borders identified by street. So, for example, that Caulfield cuts, between E and B in that location right in the dead middle by one of the examples. So I like that particular presentation in terms of the maps that are going to be presented to us when we come back for final. I also like this particular map. My biggest question was, I know the data was not, the program that was on the city website was not used for these maps. So we need to have that checked, and the consultant has said they can do that. So I'd like to see really each of those 3 idea consolidations, 1, 2, and 3, come back with the data checked. And in terms of the other maps that I preferred in general to review again, one was on page A9, Dusty, D-U-S-T-E. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I thought that map had minimal deviation, almost even districts, so I thought that was good. There are other factors in there that I liked as well. And then the one on A9-5, which is NH lowercase 1. So those are my comments there. And then in terms of themes that I prefer, you were asking about themes. One of them is geographic balance. One of them is making sure whatever's presented to us doesn't raise any concerns of material nature about compliance with the law. Obviously, that's part of the reason we're doing this, or a big part of the reason why we're doing this. And then just the contiguous nature of each of the 6 districts, so that there's not as much. I mean, some of the maps were submitted, and 5 out of the 6 districts looked fine, and then the 6th district looked like it was drawn by a committee in DC. And just that it couldn't fit, make that last district work. So those are the things that are important, as well as doing our best to factor in the community of interests that have been submitted by the public or described by the public. So those are my initial comments for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'll go back to Councilmember Fisher.
Thank you. I'm glad you elevated that NH1. I like that one as well. I thought it had a really nice even representation, although now we can't really consider that. But in terms of A1 and the deviations, I don't want to get stuck so much on that as where the boundaries are. I think one of the nice things about A2 is that it has very clear boundaries on some very clear major roadways. And to try to then fudge numbers and not have that be true, I think is is false. I'd rather see us have true boundaries. There's one thing I don't want to see is these jiggy joggy little, well, you're on that side of the street, and oh, you're on 6th Street, but you're over there, so you're in a different district. I'd like us to try to avoid that. And I think that's one of the problems I have with A2, obviously around the high school, which is where I live, Petaluma High School, that the line doesn't make any sense to me there. So, or the boundaries of that, of C, I'd like to see some rationale for why that was drawn that way, I guess, particularly on the southern side of it.
Okay, and you're not looking for that answer right now, are you?
No, it's just to my point, we have major streets that are the boundaries except for on that southern edge of C. It's the only place on this map where, the boundaries aren't really clear.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so not seeing, I do see another hand up there. It's Councilmember Barnacle, sorry.
Thank you. I want to echo what both Mayor Barrett and what Councilmember King said on idea consolidation 1 and 2. I think between 1 and 2, it's kind of splitting hairs for me, 2 and 3. But I definitely think that Midtown does have a certain character to it that we need to respect. And I really like that map for that reason. On idea consolidation 2, what I like is that we're not, it doesn't cross the river where there's no actual crossing right now. Like I could see in a future where we have a Caulfield Bridge, it makes sense where we could connect the south part of the community. But right now, unless you're saying like isolation from the other side of the community being the interest, we have a common interest that we can't get across the river to the place where we want to go. It's hard for me to justify putting people who live by Schollenberger Park with people who live by Wickersham Park. But I like both those maps and for different reasons. So I would say both those maps really stuck out to me.
Councilmember, could you, when you say both those maps, could you identify them again by name?
Yeah, idea consolidation 1 and idea consolidation 2.
Okay, I just want to make sure because you also brought in the other map that had a winged southern district, with Schollenberger and the west side. So I wasn't
Right.
sure.
Right. I'm thinking of the A2
Okay.
version
all right,
A2
Okay.
and the way that
Thank you.
that yeah.
Okay, I'm just trying to take a few notes here and just want to make sure I don't put the wrong ID on what you like. Okay.
And then I also want to echo what Councilmember Fisher said, that it's much more important to me that people feel like there's a common sense of bond than it is for us to split hairs and get our disparity down to, below 1% or 1%. I think people want to feel like they have representation above all, and that doesn't mean, a couple percentage points if it, so that's all.
And the development project or two could change those numbers anyhow.
Exactly.
Yes, going forward. Okay, so thank you. I'm not seeing any of the council hands up now, but we'll have another opportunity to talk. But I actually cannot see oh yes, I can, the attendees. So let's see if we can, we do have 4 hands up there. So Patrick, well, actually, let me just see if the city clerk has received any public comments on the workshop agenda item.
Madam Mayor, the city received 4 comments that have been posted online.
Okay, thank you. And so let's open public comment on the workshop item. And First, I would like to ask people who have submitted something to be the first people that we're going to talk with. So if you have your hand raised and you didn't really submit one of these, but you still want to talk about it, if you could put your hand down now, and then we'll call on you as soon as the people who've made submissions have had an opportunity to talk. That would be very helpful. But I will turn it over to our moderator, and you can take it from here.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think what I'm hearing from you is that we're doing public comment on this time. So do you want a 3-minute timer, or do you want the members that have submitted plans to just be able to explain their plan?
I don't want the timer. I want to have people who have submitted plans be able to come up and talk. And then we can go back to the actual other people who want to give us some information. So there we are.
So Mayor, if I may, with that approach, I would suggest we treat this as the council members are requesting feedback from map authors, as opposed to us commencing public comment, because we need to make sure when we commence public comment on the workshop that everyone has an equal opportunity.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Understood. So thank you. Looks like some members put their hands down. We have 2 hands raised, and there are currently 20 members of the public in the audience at this time. The first speaker is Janice Cater-Thompson, followed by S. Kirks. So Janice, you may unmute and begin your comments about your map. And if you could please identify the name of your map, that would be helpful so that we can bring it up on the screen and help people follow along with your comments. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you,
Okay,
Jen.
great. Actually, it's the EPA map. But the more I'm looking at other maps, I'm tending to go toward the A2 and the consolidation maps, 1 and 2 and 3, I'm not sure, but 1 for sure. And I'm looking at the map that we did, and I could not get onto the program yesterday to make any changes to it. But I feel as though what I don't like about our map is number 3, it's the whole outskirts of the community on the east side. And when we talked about dividing up north, I now feel as though that is not a good idea and it shouldn't be connected to downtown. And those are changes that I would make with our map, but I don't really want to go into the map. I just want to talk about A2. I'd like to see A2 come back and the consolidation map 1 and 2 and 3. And I'm not sure really what the difference is between 2 and 3. And thank you, because this has been very helpful tonight. And I want to thank all the council members that have had to listen to me, really go through this process and look at things very differently. And it takes a long time. And I appreciate all the public that's put so many maps into it. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Okay, Janice, please don't stop. Don't hang up or close off. Just want to see if there's anybody who has a question for her about her map or about anything else on this issue. And I'm not seeing any hands raised. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks.
So back to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Mayor. And just as a reminder, there will be time for public comment later. So those wishing to make comments about other maps, you'll have that opportunity at that time as well. Our next speaker is S. Kirks, followed by Rick Dusty. So Susan, you may unmute and please identify your map and we'll go proceed.
Well, I submitted 2 maps, and the map that I'd like to ask Chris to bring up, which I think he's prepared to do, is the 6 districts map that I submitted yesterday. I actually submitted the first map on February 8th, and it was not seen or misplaced and clearly could have been integrated into tonight's presentation. So what I'd like to say is I actually agreed with Councilmember Fisher on her questions about the way District C was created. And actually, I want to talk about the rural west side and the communities of interest that really need to be represented, which is it's the purple. I actually used numbers rather than letters, so you can see where the little hand is there. Oak Hill District, Oak Hill Brewster, and downtown, and I think maybe Mayor Barrett mentioned this. These are communities and residents who are closely connected, and I do believe that there's a real need to keep those interests together. And that brings me to, again, looking at map A with C. It just does not represent at all the rural west side and the connectivity of the west side on the outer edges of Petaluma to the southwestern district that seems to be fairly consistent. And there's a real interface there. And then there's also an interface. What is this? Is this map A? Can you go back to my map?
Yeah, this is your map.
Okay, so there is a relationship from the southwestern area in both environmentally and with communities there, especially with the purple that is the outer west. You can call it rural. That extends upward to what they are calling rural west side in the north part of Petaluma, but that's just a minor portion. It isn't the completeness of many voters in this particular area of the city who aren't that vocal politically, who are not that active politically, but from whom I have heard for many years in terms of their lifestyles, enjoying living where they do, caring so much about the area where they live. And again, then I can guarantee you that there are residents in that number 3 district that I created that the folks in the Oak Hill Brewster area have no idea even who they are or what their lives are like. So I think that representing communities and also considering our environment, and many people probably don't realize that there's a relationship from the outer western edge of Petaluma into Payne, into the central area, and into the northern area of Petaluma. And interestingly, in the last few years, since the Sid Commons development proposal came forward, and all of a sudden there was a lot more attention to this area, the open space qualities, the interest by community members, and the lifestyles in that particular area connecting over to the western edge of Petaluma are all congruent, and people are becoming more aware of that. So I'd like to also say that I'm interested to know who the authors of the idea consolidation maps are, because while I understand how you would see those and they seem clear, I can guarantee you those maps were not made by people who live in the western edge or the western area of Petaluma. So I really want these voters to be represented, and I'm one of them. I really want a voice to be able to be heard where there is that connectivity. There's a separateness with the number 3 that I created, but there's a relationship with the southwestern area, and there is a relationship with number 2, which is the Oak Hill area and downtown, and might include the area that Councilmember Fisher was talking about. I'm not sure, but those areas have always seemed to be very cohesive, very politically active, and I think that that particular area would be advisable to stay together. And then I did ask Janice Cater Thompson to take a look at my map. It wasn't available until today, but you know, I'm interested in her experience and comments for the East Petaluma sections. But as you can see with my number 5 on the east side, I extended that so that the East Petaluma residents have a voice and have participation across Highway 101. I don't think Highway 101 and the river should be, you know, determining factors when you have to consider so many different factors as our elected representatives, the communities of interest, what parts of the city, you know, have history together. And I personally love my map, and I'd really appreciate it if the council would consider, you know, uplifting the voices that, especially with that District C, clearly was just, you know, an idea of, you know, let's make this Oak Hill and extend it all the way out into an area that really is different. And like I said, I'd appreciate knowing who the authors of the idea consolidation maps are. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Our next speaker is Rick Dusty, followed by Allie Gaylord. Rick, you may unmute and begin your comments about your map. Please identify which one it is.
Okay, thank you. If you could put it up for me, it's just titled Dusty. Ah, there we go. Thanks. So a couple things. So I tried to not use the highway and the river and those kind of things as boundaries, look at those as secondary. So a couple of concepts I tried to accomplish. One was getting the mobile home parks on either side of 101 towards the north end of town in the same district. This one also to have the North McDowell or the McDowell retail corridor sort of all in the same district as well. The other thing I tried to do was, if one of the goals of this districting is to give the Latinx population, for example, a better chance of getting representation, then I tried to identify where they resided and try to get the majority of them in a district. So District 3, I think, had a very high percentage. I think it was in the high 30s. And I think the other one, which was relatively high, I could be wrong on this one, doing this from memory, was in 4. But some of the maps I looked at, and I think the consultant's map number 2, the Latinx distribution was pretty equal all the way across. And other than having a smaller number of voters to have to go after, 9 or 10,000 people, I don't think it did anything to help them try to gain representation. Or if they have a high percentage of that population, I think it'll be easier for one of their candidates to run, because it'll be more affordable for them to be able to campaign and then also to be able to get representation. So those are probably the 2 main things I was trying to do there, or 3 things. Keep the distribution as low as I could. You could probably clean this up a little bit if you had a larger distribution, because trying to keep that down to almost 0, I think I got it under 2%, meant I had to make some concessions in order to do that. But really it was around keeping the mobile home parks together, the retail corridor together, and trying to give the Hispanic population a strong voice in at least 1 or 2 of those districts. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone on the council who wants to respond to this particular? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone at this time. Go ahead, Patrick.
Thank you, Mayor. Next speaker is Allie Gaylord. And Janice, I believe you have your hand up for public comment. So there we go. Okay, so Allie, you may unmute and please let us know which map you submitted.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, council. My map was the very cleverly named version 1. If you'd like to put that up. I just also wanted to comment that I think that this workshop was extremely helpful. I really appreciate all of the explanations about the architecture. That was actually what I was hoping to hear about in the previous workshop, but it was super duper helpful. Yes, this is version 1. So the main ideas I was trying to get at with my map was to create sort of a central Petaluma, including the fairground, and really keeping the East Washington corridor together. I think using the 101 north as a boundary was something that did come out for me. But other than that, I think looking at these other maps and looking at the various architecture and the communities of interest that the consultant was putting forward really makes a lot of sense in how we can re-look at the maps and kind of make better suggestions. So I'm not necessarily advocating for this map in particular, but I do like keeping kind of a central core of Petaluma together that has some of the Latinx population and the Midtown area, which is, I think, a similar community of interest. The one thing I will say, I didn't see the consolidated maps until this presentation. And the one thing I did not like on consolidation 1 was the kind of cut out around the four corners of Washington and Sonoma Mountain Parkway and Eli Boulevard South. I think that Washington, kind of right at that corner, can be a really hard barrier, especially on for pedestrians on foot or on bicycle, because it's just a really busy street to cross north or south over Washington. So I think cutting that out in that consolidation map was kind of difficult. I also think that north or south of East Washington is kind of a different feeling if you're just cutting out that four corners. So thank you.
I see Councilmember Fisher has your hand up. Did you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I have a question for Ally. So your district number 2, it basically has Washington going right down the middle of it. And those to me seem like very sort of distinct areas on the north and south. And I just want to get your thoughts on that, because I know you know that area.
Yeah, I think this is one place where my mind has kind of changed a little bit, but I think what I was thinking when I was creating that district was that keeping the Washington corridor together on either side would allow a little bit more of kind of harmony, and each side of Washington to maybe blend a little bit and get on the same page. I do feel that the communities of interest on each side of Washington could have a little bit, could be distinct. So I think that's where I was approaching it, and I think my mind can be changed.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Not seeing other council hands up. So Patrick, is there anyone else in the audience who is a map maker?
None that have their hands raised currently, Madam Mayor.
Just for my own curiosity, is the idea consolidation map makers on this Zoom call or Zoom meeting? And would they be interested in talking if they are? If they are, please raise your hands, because there does seem to be some interest in those maps. But you, of course, don't have to. Okay, so not John Shribs. Well, I know he submitted a map, so maybe this is the time to call on him. Patrick?
Yep, John, if you'd like to unmute and tell us about the name of your map and what went into it, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Good. I submitted a hand-drawn map through, I guess, through an image. I don't know if you still have that available to show. Yes, there is. We just went by it. There it is. Yeah, and I just want to point out, I agree with some of the last couple speakers who are trying to get the Latinx community together. So I have it sort of like in the highway sections 1 and part of 3, getting this together. So I'd say, yeah, I'd say let's get those guys together. However, I do see when you're talking about Washington, north and south, sort of like different communities. I live right on the corner of Washington and Summer Mountain Parkway, Eli there. And it's not so much the north-south as it is an east-west segmentation. You just look at the houses and the value of the homes and when they were built. And you'll find out the older tract homes all near the freeway and all the new higher end stuff in area 4. So those are very two different populations entirely. And I think what was Susan was saying, getting some of the rural folks out there, I sort of agree with her on getting that community together some more. So a couple of those prior speakers I agree with entirely, but it's only getting the on the east side, those very different populations segmented properly is the only thing I would like to add on that one from prior maps. But I agree with the last few speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And that's currently our last speaker.
Okay, thank you. So I think now is the time we should go to general public, no, not general public comment, but public comment on this workshop item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members of the public wishing to provide general public or public comment on this item, please raise your hand in Zoom and you'll be called on in turn. You'll have 3 minutes in which to give your comments. And this doesn't have to be related to a map that you've done. It could be on any map. So now is your chance to let the council know your comments. Our first speaker is Eric Flato, followed by Theresa Payne Lyons. Eric, you may unmute and begin your comments.
Hi, everyone. Eric Flato here. I live and own a home in Midtown on Jefferson Street with my partner, and I just wanted to make a comment on draft version A2 and how Midtown is kind of aligned to proposed District E in a way that doesn't make sense, and now actually seeing the idea consolidation 1 and 2. You know, the issues that we face in Midtown and as a community align much more to the immediate downtown, immediate west side of Petaluma. If you think about traffic congestion, tree equity, arguably the most hotly debated piece of property behind the train station. And from a historical perspective, you know, if you go to the museum and you look at the original maps of Petaluma, a lot of, you know, our parcel and a lot of my neighbors are part of the original lot lines of the city. And I think the neighborhood of Midtown has been overlooked for a number of years, and some of that historical preservation has been eroded. And so for the main 6 or 7 key themes at the beginning of this presentation, the second bullet was on Heritage District, downtown, Brewster, Oak Hill. And I think, you know, the sentiment in the neighborhood much more aligns with that historical preservation as we continue to grow our identity. So I appreciate Mayor Barrett and Councilmember Barnacle giving Midtown a voice and making it more of a cohesive item within a district. And so I would like to voice my opinion and support for idea consolidation 1, to a lesser extent idea consolidation 2. But as it stands now with draft A2, it just doesn't make sense to have Midtown looped in with some of the east side communities all the way to the city line of Pengrove, just because the issues that we face are much different, and not that any issue for a particular neighborhood is more important or less important or bigger and smaller than another. I just think that the Midtown neighborhood is much more aligned with the immediate west side along the river, the downtown area, as we look to continue to try to preserve some of the history that remains in these neighborhoods. So I'll close with that. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the work that's going into this. It's not lost on me, the undertaking and the magnitude of making a change like this. So I appreciate everyone's efforts here.
Thank you for your comments, Eric. Our next speaker is Theresa Payne Lyons. Theresa, you may unmute and begin your comments.
Hi, thank you. I so appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I live in a section, and sorry, I'm getting some feedback here. I live in the C section and I live on a street that is a block and lived here for 35 years. And I am split from my most, my neighbors, and that right. It's already been expressed by many people about this area that separated a little differently. Like I am, my closest neighbors are. So please, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. Thank you.
Thank you, Theresa. And if you would like to submit your comments to the city clerk, because we were having difficulty hearing you, please do so at cityclerk@cityofpetaluma.org, and we'll make sure that that gets placed online. Next speaker is Susan Kirks. Susan, you may unmute and begin your comments.
I wanted to make a few general comments about how you deliberate as the elected representatives. The presenter tonight gave you the presentation, you know, with, of course, without complete maps and information, and asked if you might want to, you know, have them bring back, you know, another version of map A. And I hope you're hearing that there are a lot of people in the community who are not resonating at all with map A. And I think about decisions that you're going to make with, as I had said earlier, really important environmental awareness that we need. When I was discussing my map, another consideration is hydrology and our propensity for flooding. A lot of people think that the Midtown area is the primary area for flooding, which is of course true, but contributing factors to that, as many of us know, would be the Southwest district and then the number 3 district that I mentioned or put into my map, and the northernmost areas of Petaluma. So a really broad historic awareness is helpful. It's not just historic districts, it's our environment. It's the open spaces that are still available for us to consider. It is the lived experiences of voters whom you will never hear from, but whom you really need to represent. And I know that from the last week, talking with so many different people in Petaluma who just, you know, don't even want to be involved and felt it was too difficult to be involved in this process. So I think that as elected representatives, you have a really big responsibility here. And I think it was mentioned earlier, it might've been Mayor Barriott, about how population numbers will change depending upon future housing that will be going on, redevelopment of areas. And, you know, there are so many different things to consider, including the communities of interest. And it's a multifaceted process that I want to encourage the city council to engage in, because I really do want all of the voices in Petaluma to feel like they have been heard, even if they're not speaking. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. And Mayor.
And much of what I have to say has already been spoken to on a number of levels, but I've lived in Petaluma going on 35 years. And I live on a street that is a block and a half long. And the current map as it stands separates my half a block from the rest of my block, which are my neighbors and my friends and a little bit wider community. So I really want to have somebody who lives in this neighborhood take a look at how it's currently on the map. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Theresa. Our next speaker is Suzanne. Suzanne, you may unmute and begin your comments.
Yes, I just need some clarification on why we're doing the redistricting. From what I understood, there was not a racial representation on the city council. And in the earlier part of the discussion, I heard that you couldn't talk about the racial diversity in these various sections. So I'm a little concerned or confused as to why we're actually doing the redistricting.
Suzanne, this isn't a question and answer. If you have any other comments that you'd like to give, now's your time.
No, that was pretty much my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that is the last hand raised. So now back to you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. And with that, we'll close public comment on this item. And I'm just going to ask our city attorney if he could just reiterate what he had said at the beginning of the meeting in response to Suzanne's question, because I do think it's a legitimate question and does seem very confusing. So this is where our city attorney comes in.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I don't think you'll get any disagreement that it's a little bit complicated and a little bit confusing, including, you know, at least speaking for myself, for your legal counsel. So the initial, you know, when we received Mr. Schenkman's demand under the California Voting Rights Act that was asserting that racially polarized voting exists in Petaluma, that was the first focus of the council and staff in advising them. And as a reminder, racially polarized voting has to do with whether protected class voters are able to elect candidates of their choice, or the extent to which they're able to have a voice in electing candidates of their choice, or whether their choices, their preferred candidates are their choices for those are drowned out by protected class voters, by majority voters. So that was really the focus of the initial decision by the council to transition to district elections. And now that the council's made that decision, we have to comply with both the state law and the federal law, and the state law has to defer to the federal law under the preemption clause and under the U.S. Constitution. And one of the requirements under the Federal Voting Rights Act is that it prohibits forming districts, drawing district boundaries primarily on the basis of race, because that's something that's subject to strict scrutiny, because, you know, it's a race-based division among the districts. So that's the subtlety, that's the issue, and as you've heard in the discussion tonight, and some folks have taken into account the issues of representation in their district boundaries, but the focus for the Fair Maps Act and to be compliant with the Federal Voting Rights Act is on those communities of interest that should be reflected in the districts. And there's been, you know, at least in my view, there's been some really helpful and good discussion about that tonight. And that's the legal framework. Tom, if you're able to clarify that further, please feel free. But that would be my attempt.
Just amplifying that's right, exactly right. And unfortunately, there are just two different standards that are at play. One under the California Voting Rights Act, and you're just testing racially polarized voting. That's a very simple standard, which is, are different groups voting differently? And that's kind of the initial trigger about whether the CVRA, the California Voting Rights Act, applies. And it's a very low threshold. And then once that has been triggered and you go to drawing districts, as Eric as the city attorney mentioned, then you have different standards apply. And one of the most important standards is that one under the Constitution, federal Constitution, the Equal Protection Clause, that says race cannot be a predominant factor when drawing these lines. So it is very, it's a question that we get as experts all the time. It is the most common question because it is very complicated and you get different results in using different standards. But bottom line is, when you're drawing districts, when you now have decided to convert to districts and are drawing the actual districts, race really cannot predominate unless the Federal Voting Rights Act is telling you to take race into consideration. And we've looked at these districts very carefully and determined that the Federal Voting Rights Act does not come into play in the city of Petaluma.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you. So I see I have a few hands up by almost all our hands are up on the council now, and that's a good thing because we, from earlier council comments, I have heard from 4 council members that some preferences, at least going in before we heard from the public. And so I would like people to perhaps reiterate their preferences and what changes they would like to see to the maps and the reasons for those changes. For example, do you want to suggest a change because you would like to see the districts have more equal number of people in the districts? Is that your priority? Or do you want to change something in the district on the map you like because you are, the priority is to keep neighborhoods together, or make something like the neighborhood around the high school more clear and user-friendly? So please state what your reasoning is, and so that we know our priorities as we're going forward and moving this into a smaller number of maps. So I'm just going to start with the hands as they came, and that's Council Member Barnacle.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Would it be possible for me to ask a question of Mr. Flato? Okay. Patrick, can we elevate back Mr. Flato, please?
Actually, council member, that he just spoke in public comment, and he was not a contributor of a map. So I don't think that opportunity is available now. But if the city attorney would let me know about that, that's not something we regularly do. But I just don't know if it's a legal issue or a practice.
It's not a legal issue. It just depends on whether you want to entertain that, Madam Mayor.
I'm perfectly happy to do it because this is a workshop, and so it's a little bit more interactive. And so, but I didn't want to break the law.
You're not breaking the law. And if I
not
could,
on Zoom, at least, yeah.
and if I could, I want to suggest one other thing, and that if it makes sense or is acceptable to you, and that is, as we hear from the council members about their preferences, I think it will be helpful for staff to follow those with straw polling, so that we can see to the extent those are shared by 3 or more council members. So that, because now we're getting that will mean that we're getting some direction.
Thank you. That's very good advice, and helps me from having to keep little straw votes on my tablet here. I see Mr. Flato is still in the on the Zoom meeting, so if he can speak, can
Yes,
okay,
I'm here.
Good. Okay, so you're going to be asked a question by Council Member Barnacle.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thanks for the flexibility, Madam Mayor. So you mentioned that you thought, Mid-Penn had more in common, and I just wonder, do you feel like you have representation now?
That's a good question. I will say to a large extent, no. I think that our neighborhood has, as I said earlier, been a little bit overlooked, and that's part of the reason for some of the historical erosion in the neighborhood. We still have structures and homes that date back to the early 1900s, yet in some areas it's been replaced with strip malls or tear downs or other things. And so I just think from that perspective, it's much more aligned to how we want to maintain cohesiveness with the downtown and immediate surrounding areas. If that
Got you.
I don't know if that
Okay.
specifically answered your question, but hopefully it did.
I don't know if there are specific questions, so that's good enough. Thank you.
Mhm.
So the reason why I asked that for the rest of the council was because in the district in area C that we were looking at, where we identified that as keeping Midtown together, there's 4 people on the council right now who live in that district. And so to have a person who lives in Midtown say that he doesn't feel like he has representation, but there's 4 people on the council right now that would be living in his district, it makes me wonder if the dividing line, if there's something about Midtown that needs to stay more central. And I'm thinking something along like there's some geographic things over on the west side that where there's hills, and I don't know if it's possible to sort of almost create like circles coming outward from the center of town on the west side as an architecture. But as you get farther out, it gets pretty hilly. And as you get towards Midtown, as you get towards the 6th Street, 5th Street, those things, there's a lot less hills. And I just wonder if there's some common sense of interest around that. Because if we did something like used idea consolidation 1, dare I say we wouldn't necessarily address Mr. Flato's concern about not having representation. And maybe, and I like that map, but it's concern. The other thing I want to uplift is what Mr. Shrib said, in that over on the east side, that Washington is less of a divider than Sonoma Mountain Parkway. The homes on the outer side of Sonoma Mountain Parkway do seem to be newer, somewhat larger. And so versus the ones that are on the inside of Sonoma Mountain Parkway, Eli Boulevard, coming inward. And so I just wonder if there's something to trying to keep Sonoma Mountain Parkway as some sort of a barrier on the east side, more so than Washington. And then the one thing I do really like about idea consolidation 1 is I think that there is a common set of interests around McDowell Boulevard, and that does a fairly decent job, I think, of capturing that. And so I guess when I think about where to move it, if we could push, potentially push lines, maybe consolidate A and D, out to Sonoma Mountain Parkway, Eli Boulevard, and make sort of an outer district out there. It also seems like they have common issues that they're farthest away from the rest of the town. Pretty much anywhere you live out there at that edge, you're the farthest away. So there's a common interest of, maybe my home is newer, I'm farther away from our downtown, I'm farther away from our fairgrounds, what have you. I could see something there. And if we did that, possibly pushing area E out to Sonoma Mountain Parkway and bringing it over to Washington could create some would fill that population. Yeah, those are some of my initial thoughts. I'll share more later, but it feels like the hills in area C are the hilly area over by Cherry Valley and whatnot is very different than the sort of lower areas like Sid Commons in terms of interest, in terms of what they might be, concerned about in their communities. So I'll leave it at that.
Madam Mayor and Council, if I could make a suggestion,
Yes.
see if it's
Go ahead.
helpful. Before we leave Councilmember Barnacle's comments. So if it works for the council, and I think, Chris, it's important that it also works for the demographer. I was thinking it might be helpful if, say, like starting with Councilmember Barnacle, if you're able, Councilmember, to refer to give some kind of designation to the communities of interest you're interested in having reflected and kept intact. If there's 1, 2, 3, it sounds like there's maybe 3 or maybe 4. If you can do that, and then we can see if by straw poll if other council members are support the same. And if that's a way, Chris, that it's helpful to go forward in terms of returning to the council, having gathered that might be a way to proceed and make sure we capture the key input from the members.
Okay. So, Chris, did you want to respond to that?
Oh, I was going to say that I think the conversation and the description that Councilmember Barnacle just went through about the shifts he'd like to see in IDC1 or IC1 really helps articulate a draft map that I can bring forward to the next council meeting. Because I think it talks through the shifts in population that you need to make between A, D, E, and probably B, with B coming over if you're using this as a Eli and Sonoma Mountain Parkway as a divider.
Okay.
Thank you, Chris. So maybe, Madam Mayor, we could straw poll his remarks.
Okay, so let me try and do that. So what I did hear from Councilmember Barnacle was that from the beginning of the presentation by the team here is there was a keep the eastern edge together north to south. And there were a number of submittals from the community that liked to do that. And that is something that Councilmember Barnacle was saying he thought was a good idea, with the western edge of that being the Eli's Sonoma Mountain Parkway border. Councilmember Barnacle, stop me at any point if I'm misrepresenting that. So I'm going to ask the council members. I do know who was in what order, and I'm going to ask you to take your hands down because we're going to do a little straw poll now and see if there are other people who think that that's a good idea. So Kevin, can you put your hand down, and Delinda, put your hand down, and
Yeah, I may ask a
Can I
question.
ask a question? Yeah.
Yeah.
okay, so a couple questions here. So Councilmember Fisher, then Councilmember McDonald.
Well, question is communities of interest versus communities that are the same. And I don't know, maybe there's no difference, but I didn't hear coming from the community that there's a community of interest along the edge of the city from Sonoma Mountain Parkway to our border. And so I would vote against that, because my comments started out, and at the last meeting as well, suggesting that I would like to see as much diversity in our districts as we can. And I think when you lump all these folks together who are in the same age home, on the same basic parallel at the city, you get absolutely no diversity. And so I just question our communities of interest versus diversity. And I'm confused about it.
Okay, this is good. This is good. So these are the questions that I think we should be asking before we take the straw poll. So thank you very much. And I'm going to ask Councilmember McDonald, because he's probably on that same line.
Very similar, yes. So I was looking at the other maps submitted by the community, and I would ask Councilman Barnacle if the Dusty map doesn't do a lot of what he's interested in. And because when we send the consultants back to the drawing board to start over, they're not doing the population data on the fly like they are. And we have the population data for the Dusty thing. Maybe if he could distinguish his preferred alternative against the Dusty map, which has the bones of what he's talking about, you know, we'd see it from two views, what's being proposed.
Okay, that's another good.
That's a question for Brian there.
Okay, that's another good thing. And perhaps while he's thinking about that, maybe, did anybody else have any questions? I will jump in because I'm thinking about this a little bit more like Councilmember Fisher, in that, you know, I think people who live along the urban separator, which is what that whole group of people are, who are the north to south on the east side, may have a lot to, they also are the urban wild life or urban and wildland interface people. And that also wraps around the, on this map that we're looking at right now, into District 1 and the hill part, as Councilmember Barnacle pointed out, in 2 as well. You know, so those people all have something in common that way, but, you know, so what? You know, is that really, or does that make them a community of interest? You know, I'm not really buying that so much either. And I do think this is, like, to me, the worst part about districting is to have groups of people who feel they have nothing in common with the other people in our city. And I want to see our city looking at districting as a way of bringing everybody together and having more of a say. And I think it's a difficult task. So if we have, did you want to get respond to Councilmember McDonald, Councilmember Barnacle?
So, I mean, I think this is a decent representation of that. And I guess when I think of, like, the communities of interest, to your point though, like if you live in a WUI, the wildland urban interface, that's, you know, and you have the same style of home, you have a common interest. You have a, you know, you share a threat of wildfire, you share a threat of, you know, you have homes or roads that are probably relatively the same age, and so they're going to need paving at the same time, or maybe they, you know, they were all built with, you know, cruddy cul-de-sacs, and you have terrible access, and that's an issue that you need, right? So that's, I guess, where I'm going is like, you know, the combination of social and geographic, topographic things like that make it feels like there is something there. So that's my point, I guess. But I think that Dusty's map is a good example. I might extend Area 5 farther toward Adobe Golf Course than up towards the north. But I do think that does a pretty decent job. Yeah.
Okay.
But the thing I don't like about this one is that I don't like it jumping across in number 1. I don't think that jumping across the river right there and running all the way down to out Lakeville, you know, it just doesn't, that feels like it's really disconnected. So.
Oh, yeah, okay, we're not voting on any map right now. We're just looking at the whole idea of take a straw vote on what, unless Councilmember King has a question here. I'm not sure about these straw votes yet. It may be premature, Eric. So let's get a few more questions and comments out before we start looking at straw votes.
Sure.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting we rush the dialogue at all. So thanks, Madam Mayor.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the original people who had their hands up after Brian, and that was Delinda, and then Dennis, and then Kevin, and then, no, Delinda, Kevin, Dennis, and David. So go ahead, Delinda.
It was so long ago, I don't remember why I had my hand up.
That's okay. You'll get another bite at this.
Well, I want to go back to my preference for this districting plan. I don't know if we want to put it back up on the screen, but I think the more we talk about the different ideas and hear from the public, to Susan Kirk's point, this districting plan, and you can't see it because I've got it on mine, but you don't have it on yours. But it wraps that number 2, to her point, it wraps the similar sort of more rural areas. And in my mind, again, it also sort of radiates from a more central part of our community. While I agree that people in the WUI along the edge there may have things in common, I think if what we're trying to do is divide our city in such a way that we have more representation, that does the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. And that we really, and I would like to get as diverse communities as we can by staying contiguous. And I think that this map goes a long way to doing that. And it also expands then out that Midtown area. Can't really encroach more on the downtown probably because of populations. But it also seems to be fairly symmetrical, if you will, given the population of each area. So I think that's all I was going to say.
Okay, so while I still have you there, is your interest in this map because it has closer numbers in each district, or because it seems to represent one communities of interest more clearly?
Well, because it wasn't done by our consultant, I don't know if it does meet the communities of interest that we heard from the community about. And so I guess that's the analysis I would like them to do. It seems to me it does, based on the various communities of interest. I'm not sure about the area around Petaluma High School. It's a little hard to see on that corner. But I believe that it does meet those criteria. And I like it because of when we first talked about districting, months ago, and in my mind, it was like, oh yeah, so this is what it's going to look like. And this was sort of what it looked like in my mind. Although I must say, it's really challenging dividing our city into 6 different areas, given how small it is. So.
Yes, it is. Okay, so you're still not going to go with a straw vote yet. So I want to hear from more people. So Councilmember McDonald.
Well, thank you. If we could leave that map up there just for 1 second. So I'll straw vote in. That had the west side right, but I don't think it has the east side right. And I think that part of what we're talking about is that every map has a little something good and a little something that we're not excited about. And so right there, I'd be happy with 1 and 2, and they seem to represent a lot of what we're hearing about. But more broadly, I'm just really uncomfortable in this process because we're being asked to tear the city apart. We're being asked to not have broad interests. We're being asked to define a smaller interest, more focused interest. I mean, with the intent of the voices that are drowned out to not be drowned out. But the process doesn't succeed at that. It's still the voices. I mean, just to Suzanne's point from the public comment period, why are we doing this? Well, we're required to do this, and it doesn't really succeed. It maybe has opportunity, where right now our Latinx population is distributed 13% across the whole of the city. We might be able to elevate one district, not specifically on a racial basis, but to a voting block of in the 18-19%. That doesn't change whether racially polarized voting will occur. It just means that we won't be against the law at any part of it because we'll have done districting. So that's disappointing. And then further, everybody's comments tonight is their truth. In all their maps that they turned in, it's their truth. So people say, we want more trees in our neighborhood. The next block from your block has more trees. Your block doesn't have trees. You put that, you might be in the southwest, northeast, wherever. You know, if you feel that the park is too far, everyone shares those concerns. I mean, so just because we have identified concerns doesn't mean they're not the same concern for many people in many districts. And that goes for WUI as well. The urban interface question. The other thing is sometimes those interests are diametrically opposed. Like in Midtown. Midtown has two things key to it. One, it is the lowest price housing area in the city, or one of the very lowest. It's affordable, and so it has people of lesser wealth in that area. And as the low price, it is getting gentrified, purchased up. The demographics of that area are changing. Today, their community of interest is aligned one way if you're on one side of the street or in one house, and in the next house, because you've come to town and have found the least price and are starting to remodel, you and your neighbors might have diametrically opposed interests. So how do we decide the community of interest? By the half dozen speakers tonight from one area, or the one or two speakers from that area? It's more what we know of the area in the city as a whole, and that's why each of us is supposed to represent the whole of the city and know these things citywide. So my preference on all this is one far side edge of town district, and like the dusty map showed, and then into interior east side districts like that showed. And Midtown is not a large enough demographic block to be independent. It ties to something. I mean, with 60% of the people on the east side of the freeway, one district will jump the freeway. And the populations at the very northwest end, at Stony Point, and the populations at Schollenberger are kind of immaterial to float into any district and not ruin any district. The one thing I did notice about the A2 map is it has lower numbers where growth downtown is likely. That's a positive. So those would be my preferences: is a far east side and the two west sides, like I mentioned at the very beginning from the district mapping. Thank you for now.
So wait, before you sign off on this one, did you have actual maps that you wanted to prefer?
Yes, I do like the dusty map, and I do like the west side as shown on district map.
West side only of districting map.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And the idea consolidation has a lot going for it on the east side as well.
Okay, all right.
Somebody else wants to champion that one.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. Thank you. This is how we're gonna, put in the all the ingredients and then make something out of it. Okay, so now we have Councilmember Posake followed by Councilmember King.
Yeah, I have some comments about perhaps maps that I like or don't like, but I'm wondering, since we started all of this, that I haven't heard, I don't know if I've heard anyone from the community say that they're interested in diversity. And I think it's reasonable to think about that. I wonder if that shouldn't be the first straw poll we do, is how many on this council are interested in a diversity through districts versus the way most of our community seems to be thinking about keeping communities of interest together and like communities of interest together as opposed to diverse ones. I just throw that out there.
Okay, well, I see our city attorney scratching his head about that one, and literally, and
I
I have,
actually just had an itch. That's not
Yeah,
a comment.
well, it does, it makes me think, can we actually ask that question? Because basically it is asking the question of, do we want our districts to, reflect racial diversity?
So
That's the reason we're doing this, but somehow we can't use that as a measure. So, that's a real catch-22 from my perspective.
well, I don't think that's. I don't think that's quite the what led us down this path. And Tom may need to help me out. I think we may want to also go back to Mr. Chafee to hear about a little bit more about the communities of interest the maps should reflect based on the public input. But I think what took us down the path that we're on in the first instance was whether there was a potential for racially polarized voting being found in the city, which is, if so, requires districting. And again, that racially polarized voting has to do with whether protected class voters are able to elect candidates of their choice, or whether their votes are drowned out by majority voters. So that's the first thing, and which is not the same as diversity, I think, technically speaking. And then the second issue is to make sure that under the federal law, since it's not possible, as we've discussed, to draw a majority minority district in Petaluma. If it were, we would be required to do that. And Tom can elaborate on that if there are more questions, or to better explain that. So that's really a prohibition in the federal law, and it's clear, I think, in the Fair Maps Act, which is maybe where we need to end up with this in terms of the guidance for the council and the community on how to best draw the boundaries, that specify the criteria for them based on communities of interest and representation with respect to them. So I don't know, Tom, if it's possible to boil that down better, or Chris, if you can clarify a little bit from a pragmatic standpoint about taking, reflecting the Fair Maps Act criteria in ways that make sense for the community, and that where they feel that those communities are preserved. So maybe if I may, Madam Mayor, if Tom could assist with that, and maybe Chris too, that'd be helpful, I think.
Absolutely.
Sure. I'll just say, I thought that Councilmember Posake raised a really good way framing of it, of whether you want diversity first with respect to within communities of interest, and then second, whether you want diversity or commonality of many communities of interest coming together in one district. I think they're two different questions. And then, of course, there's the ultimate question of racial diversity, which I thought City Attorney Danley handled very well, but which is a separate legal issue, and we've talked about the confines that you're under with respect to that issue. But if you're talking about not racial diversity, but just overall diversity and what your goal should be, I think we do need to go back to the Fair Maps Act, which you are, obviously adhering to, and that does say that communities of interest should be kept together to the extent you have that information from the communities, because they need to be, and again, these are common interests among people, not among houses, but among people and their common interests. But I thought City Council member Posake made a really good point, which is you can have diversity. So that is important to keep communities of interest together when people are asking for those communities to be kept together for purposes of being able to articulate their interest to a particular council member. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to keep different and diverse communities of interest that might be contiguous separated, that you can have some diversity within, as long as you adhere to overall contiguity. You have to keep, there are just some boundary limits that you're stuck with. You have to keep certain areas of the city whole, but within keeping communities of interest whole, you can have diverse communities within a district. And I don't know if Chris, you have anything else to add to that. That was, I thought that's a really good point, that, communities of interest is one thing and diversity of a district is another.
I think, Tom, you've done a really good job. I just think of it kind of as an example. If you wanted to put all of the wildland urban interface into one district, you'd have this district that's went all the way around the city, right? And that, I guess, is possible, but in function, those aren't really functionally contiguous. They don't touch each other, right? It's like you're doing this bound around the district, around the city. And so that's really where the idea of, to me, diversity comes in within communities of interest. The Fair Maps Act really articulates the idea of, as practicable, uniting a community of interest together. That could be the WUI, that could be something like homeowners versus renters, that could be the age of homes, things that have already been discussed by all the council members. You could just unite them into one district. But as the legislative body, you can also make the choice of, we want to have multiple communities of interest around the wildlife urban interface in separate districts, because we want to have multiple voices on the council to represent that idea or that community of interest. So that's a long answer for, it's really up to you.
It should, yes, I got the message. Councilmember Posake, did you want to respond or talk further?
Not unless you want me to talk about more details about what I favor, but if
Yes, I do.
Okay. In this regard, I mean, I liked a lot what Susan Kirks did with the west side, but not so much the east side. Again, I feel like there is more slightly indistinct communities of interest on the east side, similar communities north to south than north to south along more similarity north to south along 101, for example, or along the urban growth boundary than there is similarity of ideas going. In other words, I tended to come here favoring some separation of the east side from north to south, whether it's Eli or Maria, or both in some sense. I mean, that gets 3 skinny districts there, but anyway, I mean, if we're talking A2, I think we don't want to split the high school. If we're talking IC1, I forget what IC means. That's what I wrote, idea consolidation. I think what that does with Midtown is good, and I think that could be mixed together with what Susan Kirks talked about, the east side of linking the east, linking the rural north of the city with the western edge of the west side, the northwestern edge, if you will, of the west side. I like idea consolidation 1 better than 2. Again, Midtown's important, but the one thing I don't like about idea consolidation 1 is the crossing of the river of the one district. If we go back, we're on 2 now. Could we go back to idea consolidation 1? The section B, crossing the river, I'm not sure about that. I think Councilmember Barnacle talked about that as well. But again, if we're talking about trying to have diverse districts, and I see merit in that. Some of these things become less important. I'll leave it at that for now.
Oh, okay, thank you. No one seems to be bringing up the issue of keeping mobile home parks together, which some of these maps do and some do not. The one that's up right now does for all except for Little Woods Mobile Home Park. But anyhow, I just want to bring that up as a clear community of interest that really we haven't heard much about. So thank you, Councilmember Posake. And now I will go to Chris Chaffee. You have your hand still up, or did you put it up again? No, oh, okay. So I'm going to go to Dave King.
So I'll just make a few comments here. And first of all, I wanted to thank everybody who submitted a map. That wasn't an easy thing to do, and I appreciate your public participation. And I think I speak for everybody up here on this one, is that if we're not talking about your map, it's not because we didn't appreciate your effort or what you submitted. That it's just that this is not as easy as I anticipated about 3 or 4 months ago. Let's put it that way. I don't know what I was thinking 3 or 4 months ago on this, but I thought it might be just a tad easier than this. So I want to speak to a couple of the things that have been discussed by my colleagues here and folks from the public. The first is community of interest. I think there really is quite a bit of localized community of interest, and I think it's important to try to have those factored in. But I also think we should recognize that there are communities of interest that go throughout the city. I mean, for example, if you have a child in a grade school or a high school, it's not necessarily that you're in one geographic area. There's a chunk of people that'll be in that geographic area. But I know when my kids were in grade school, there were people probably from every district on every map that was submitted or is being considered. The same is true for things like kids' sports. You can have people from all over the cities. If you like to go to farmers markets, there's farmers markets all over the cities. Whatever your interest is in that respect, there's that broader interest too. So, and I agree that there's also localized interest. I mean, we heard folks from Midtown speaking to that tonight. We've heard people speaking about it from the east side and so forth. I'm more in favor of making sure that districts are not kind of gated communities where you have, this socioeconomic group over here and this socioeconomic group over here. I like the diversity of geography, because I think in our city it works. I mean, if you look at most of these maps with 6 districts, you get a pretty broad socioeconomic grouping within pretty much each district. And there's probably some variations, but it's not huge. And I think that's important, because I think one way to establish community of interest is to talk to people that you ordinarily wouldn't hear from or speak with. And I think that may be one of the advantages of having these districts, is that it will open that up a bit for some folks in town. But I also think, when we get down to the task that's at hand and remaining public input we're going to get at our next meeting, I'd like to see us come back and decide on a certain number of maps, particularly the ones that have been submitted. I've got about 4 or 5 that I'm interested in seeing come back. And then secondarily to that, there were some comments tonight, on specific maps that are of interest. For example, Councilmember Fisher's comment regarding the high school, and I'm drawing a blank on which specific map he was referring to. I think having, this is this map and this is an alteration of that map is something we can look at too, or should look at. And then we can narrow it down from there.
So Dave, can I interrupt? I'm sorry. Yeah, I think this is the meeting where we want to be doing what you're suggesting. I think, the idea that you have 4 or 5 maps, and you may, like Councilmember Posake said, I like the east side of this map and I like the west side of this map. And, so that So then we can go back and once we get everybody's, what I like and, what you don't like, I don't necessarily want to hear so much about. It's like what you like and where we can go forward with. That will help us then do the straw votes. So, so that's the direction I'm trying to get you to go in. Thank you.
Well, I just to follow up on your question, are we just going to come back? Is the plan here to come back with one map on at the next meeting, or to have some choices? Because I think at this point the public has seen 20 to 30 maps, whatever the number is, 25 to 30 maps. I think at some point they need to have a look at some smaller number so that when they weigh in, they can say, all right, these are the 6 choices. This is the one I really like, or this is, or these are the 2 I really like.
Okay, so yeah,
So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do by when we leave this meeting is to perhaps have 6 or fewer maps that the staff and the consultants will take with where our straw polls are about, what our values are in terms of changing those maps. And then we're going to be doing a lot of cut and pasting from the Zoom windows at our March 7th meeting.
All right, well, I've already spoken to some of the maps that I like, but I better say it again.
Okay.
First of all, the consultant's map A2, I would like to see that come back with a little more geographic balance.
And can you say what you mean by geographic balance?
Yeah, the deviations being a little more narrow in terms of the total population in each of the 6 districts. And it doesn't have to be precise. I don't want to destroy communities of interest as a result, but there's some pretty good gaps. And I think while things can change over the course of 10 years, in 10 years, the future council can readjust those. But in the meantime, I'd like to see some balance, relative balance. And that was, I think, one of the flaws of A2. I would like to see the Dusty map come back. I liked idea consolidations 1 and 2 to be considered. I did like NH1, which hasn't got a lot of play other than one other person so far that I've heard.
Is there something about that map that you'd like to point out to us as?
You have to put it up on the map.
Okay.
I went through this and wrote pages of notes, and I don't have these things memorized.
Because it would be helpful for us to say what it is about this map that it addresses in a way that you think is important.
I like the deviation, the geographic, the population deviation. I like the balance on the Latinx community. I thought the districts were very consolidated in terms of geography. Those are the main points I would make. I mean, doesn't look like somebody came in and gerrymandered the district. And to me, that's important. I mean, I know that there's going to have to be some degree of that, but these are things that I thought were important. And although I can't really tell from looking at this map when I was staring at it earlier in the weekend, it's the geographic barriers seem to fit as well as some of the other maps. Okay. And my comment on that is none of them are going to be perfect.
Oh yeah,
by a mile. So those were the 5 that I prefer. And I'll stop here. I don't know if you need. And suggested changes, I think I've mentioned a few of those. And I'm open to some of the comments, like I said earlier, I'm open to some of the comments made by my colleagues. I mean, I think that there's been some important notes here on some of these maps. So.
Thank you. Okay, so now it's Councilmember Barnacle followed by Councilmember Healy.
I actually want to just uplift what I heard from Councilmember McDonald. He said that the districting map got the west side right. I tend to agree with that. And then he brought up the Dusty map, and I think that the Dusty map for me kind of gets the east side more right. So my recommendation would be to try and bring us back a map that combines the west side of districting and the east side of Dusty.
Okay, thank you. And Dave King, did you have your hand back up? Oh, okay. Councilmember Healy.
Thank you. So in response to your question, Madam Mayor, I would hope we can end up with a map that keeps the mobile home parks together as a community of interest up North McDowell and Leisure Lake. But that's yet to be seen. I think all of these maps will serve the primary purpose of giving the east side representation once again, and not have the entire city council drawn from a couple neighborhoods on the west side. So in that sense, they're all going to be a step forward. In terms of the ones I would like to see come back, I agree with Councilmember King that draft map A2 should be brought back, but the population needs to get less than a deviation of 8%. I don't need 1% or 0%, but 8% is too much. And I know the consultants like these nice clean lines, but there are some very obvious things that can be done to get those populations closer together. The other two that I'll call out, I like Rick Dusty's map. If you could put that up for 1 second. Yeah, that one. So the only thing I would say is that funny little squiggle of 5 coming down and grabbing John Scherrer's house at the edge of 6, I think that should be smoothed out. But other than that, I think that's one that should be brought forward. And then I think idea consolidation 1 as is should be brought forward. And if there's council support for, idea consolidation 1 version 2, I'm okay with that too, but I'd like to see that one brought forward. And I don't disagree with other council members' comments. I do agree that we need to get this down to a more workable number for next time, so that we can have a final discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to speak to these? Okay, so what okay, so now we're going to be talking about straw polls. I just, because I think there's several overlapping ones that, in terms of what we want, and then, for the actual districts that will go forward to the next meeting, and then the direction on looking at those maps. And you guys have been real good, but I may not have gotten it all. So the maps that I'm hearing we want to go forward with, and we may cull from this. This is the universe of everybody. And if there's only one person who wants one of these, it's not going to make it. But okay, so districting plan, Dusty, idea consolidation 1 and 2, 6 districts by Susan Kurtz, districting plan, that we already got that one, and Dusty, we already got that one, A2, we already got that one, NH1, let me just look for my earlier maps. Okay, so did anybody say one that I didn't pick up? Okay, so that's the universe that we're dealing with. Now the question becomes, some people, okay, I heard 2 people specifically say they want tighter numbers among the districts. I would like to throw my side on that side. I would like to throw my vote on that side as well. is tighter numbers something that other people are interested in? If I have Mike Healy, Dave King, Theresa Barrett on that side. Does anybody else want to please raise your, your little pink, yellow hand or whatever, if you want that, or if it doesn't matter to you, keep it down.
Okay. May I ask a question?
Of course, of course.
Yeah, thanks. So I see that as a micro issue that, I mean, is essential, but we're still in the macro level. And, I think, yes, it's a priority for me, but not as big a priority as getting the district right.
Okay, but so what we're actually doing right now is directing staff and the consultant to go back and make these maps, the map that we're going to go in at the next meeting, because we don't want to be there till 1 a.m. Say, oh yeah, that's the map that meets all the things that I said I wanted. So if you want to be giving direction to staff about what you want to see on these maps, then yes, you're in favor of something. If you don't care about it, don't bring it up at the next meeting and say, oh, well, actually really what I wanted was, all the swimming pools to be in the same area. No one's ever heard about that before. You don't bring something up later. This is the time now. So if you're interested in tighter numbers, that, weigh in, and then you can always loosen that if you have someone on the wrong side of the street.
Then my under over is 5%.
Okay, 5%. Thank you. That's very, very clear. Okay, Councilmember Barnacle.
Yeah, thank you. Clearly, Councilmember McDonald was watching the Super Bowl this weekend. My request to staff is that if we're going to tighten things up to get them, and you feel like you're making a judgment decision, that if you're taking something from 8 to 2 or something like that, that you can produce 2 maps maybe, so that we see like the decision to balance tighter numbers or versus a common interest is a political decision. It should be made by the politicians. And so if you're going to bring forward 2 sets, like if you're going to bring forward that trade-off, it'd be good to see what was the trade-off, right? Where did you fudge the boundary to get better numbers? And that's my request. But I want to see tighter numbers too, but I also want to know what the trade-off was.
And I think that the way that's done is that we, the consultant has all the existing maps, and he has the ones that we are asking him to work on to make a better map. And so what exists now is what it is, and how they get the numbers better, we can see the difference between those 2 maps. That will be very clear, and I think that's a good thing that that we do want to see that. Absolutely. I think that's a very good way of positioning it, because it's very, as Councilmember King said, yeah, I saw it all weekend, but I can't remember it, unless I have it in front of me. You've got to see it to know, what the differences are. So, okay. So, so I've got one, I think I heard that Barnacle and McDonald are also interested in tighter numbers, but they want to see what the exchange is. So, okay. All right. So I think that is at least a majority there. East side, west side was divisions on maps. There was, I think the only 2 maps that had only 1 person on each of those maps was NH1 and 6 districts. So that would be Councilmember King and Councilmember Posake. So if you would like to say why, what it is about those maps that you really want to see either added to the other maps or duplicated, or what it is that really you want from that map in the final map.
Well, I'll start, I guess.
You can take a minute and think about it for a second. I don't want to put you on the spot because Councilmember Fisher has her hand up. So let's let her speak while you 2 figure out what you wanted from those maps. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I also liked NH1. And again, what I liked about it was that it had a really nice, even representation. and a tiny 0.8 deviation. And that it seemed to be very tight in terms of geographics.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just missed that, so I'm sorry. So, Dave King, you don't really have to defend yourself since you've got another person who's actually, pushing that one forward as well.
I was going to point that out,
Okay.
actually, but because I remember that. And I spoke to this map, I think, about 20 minutes ago. So the one thing that I would concur with Council Member Fisher is that it is got a very minor deviation on population. I don't want to repeat. I did say this about 20 minutes ago.
Okay, so I will just say, in terms of, even though I said I don't want to hear what people don't like, I'm going to say what I don't like about this map. And I have this section 6. I find that to be a little odd, and I don't really understand the thinking of it as a cohesive unit. The other 5 I see is okay, but that 6th one does give me the kind of heartburn that I think the 2 wings in the south, east, and west give Councilmember Barnacle. So anyhow,
Totally fractures Midtown.
Yeah.
It totally fractures Midtown.
Yeah, it's just that's an issue for me. But I do, I think the east side on that one is pretty good. But you clearly have to make some changes if you're going to get rid of that west side, section 6.
Well, can I offer that I prefer the east side of this to Dusty's map because it goes for me to a more diverse set of districts.
Okay, that's an interesting bit of information. This is Dusty's map. Okay, so you're looking at a more east-west divisions, and this
Correct.
is looking at more north-south divisions.
Exactly.
Okay, so do people want to weigh in on that, on the about the east side, about north-south versus east-west in terms of divisions?
Yeah.
Yes, who's that? I know. Oh, is that Brian?
I think I'm speaking out of turn though. Everybody's got their hand up right
No.
now. So
Well, okay. Well, I don't know if they want to speak to this issue in particular. That's what I just asked. So go ahead and speak, Brian.
okay. The one of the concerns that I have about doing the north-south is to be frank right now, I feel like wealthy people and retired people can afford to run for council because it takes a lot of time and it takes and you don't get paid. And the reason why I like taking the older homes is because it puts people in a similar socioeconomic class. This is all theoretical. Obviously, everything we're doing right now is just a bunch of sausage making in theory. But I just want to, I like the idea of creating a place where homes that are the similar age, that have people that are similar income levels, that you can have a blue collar neighborhood because as Councilmember McDonald said, we're getting gentrified, and the newer homes out on the far east side of town are not getting gentrified. Those are new, like high-end homes, and the issues that are going to be faced in the older homes seem like they have common interests, and I just I would love to see a server on council someday, or the carpenter, or someone who gets up and works 40 or 50 hours a week to put food on their table, and ideally is paid by the city for their time doing this work. But I just, I think there's, it would be great to create a district that can support that.
So then you are arguing in favor of a more north-south division than an east-west division?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I guess if I was going to straw poll something, I would say, do we feel like the Sonoma Mountain Parkway, Eli Boulevard is a better divider than the sort of the ones that cut our city, like Caulfield and Washington and Rainier? Which of those do we feel like is a more relevant, divider?
Okay, yeah, I guess if we can separate different communities of interest, which could provide the diversity, because it doesn't look like you're looking at much diversity in the north-south within those districts.
In the staff report, the summary of maps, it says the first one that was grouped together, East Petaluma, keeps easternmost portion of Petaluma in one whole district. That, I guess, is what I would propose that we straw poll. Do folks feel like we should keep the eastern part, the most eastern part of Petaluma as a whole district?
Okay, so thank you for that. We'll get to that. Okay, so Vice Mayor Posake, Healy, McDonald, go ahead.
Sorry, Mayor, I don't need to add anything now unless there's something you want me to comment on in relation.
No, you had your hand up. That's why.
No, I know, but
Okay. Do you want to comment on the north-south on the east side or east-west on the east side?
Well, my thinking has mostly been along the lines of Councilmember Barnacle's, but there are a lot of, there are significant reasons to go the opposite way and make the communities more diverse. Maybe you could get all working class folks on the city council if you did that, but so I'm becoming less wed to anything the more we talk about this, and ready to consider the city a circle and divide it into 6 equal parts with no get the deviation down to 0.5% and just do it. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Healy.
Thank you. So, Madam Mayor, I think the 7 districts that you called out from your notes as moving forward to next time, I think that may be what we can achieve tonight, and that those maps have different features, and we can have the rest of this conversation next time. I don't see us really making further progress along these straw poll issues tonight. I'd like to see all 7 of those brought forward, and we can look at them and have a conversation about which ones work best.
Okay, do you want to weigh in on the north-south versus east-west districts on the east side of town?
Not tonight, because I think the seven maps you've called out address it different ways, and when we get all the information on those, we can weigh that along with everything else, because they're trade-offs. If you achieve one thing perfect in one part of town, then you're squeezing a balloon in the other part of town.
Okay.
And I think we all recognize that.
Okay, so Councilmember McDonald.
Thank you. Yeah, I think perhaps what we're seeing is 2 different views of how this might happen. And, maybe it's a good time to remind the folks at home, the hundreds that are watching, thousands that are watching, that this is their public workshop. And though they didn't have the time to weigh in and do the maps, and we had so many good volunteers who did help with the maps, now is a good time to seeing how it's looking, what potential actions there might be, and maybe contacting your favorite or all city council persons, or dropping a note to the city clerk about how you feel your neighborhood really works. I know that's probably in your wrap up, you're probably gonna do it, but I just couldn't resist suggesting that this needs bigger view than the 7 of us. Thanks.
Well, this is why we were elected, however, so no dodging this bullet. Do you have an opinion about east-west, east side, north-south, or east-west?
I think the far east one, the Sonoma Mountain line is the way to go.
So you think north-south?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for weighing in on that. And I'm going to go to Councilmember Fisher.
Thank you. So of the maps you mentioned, are we going to take a poll on all of those or some of those or none of those and ask, because 6 districts, I don't think anybody asked to bring that forward. What, maybe just one person.
Yes, there was just one person on that. And so, you know, if we don't get someone else who wants to do that, it isn't one that I would suggest going forward unless Councilmember Posake wants to, you know, strengthen what it is from that map that he would like to see in the other maps.
No, if there's no other support for that, I think we should eliminate it at this point.
Oh, okay, thank you. So down to 6. So I'm seeing, oh, Councilmember King, I'm sorry.
Yeah. As to the north, south, east, west, I think the problem with me giving, I probably will have an opinion, but I have to see a map. Because if you're moving something around in one part of town, you have to move it around in another part of town. It's just the nature of trying to consolidate this into 6 districts. And I, you know, in the abstract, it's certainly something to look at. In the specific, I'd like to see what it looks like. And so I don't really have a, you know, a decision on that straw poll question tonight. And I don't know how that will look. And I do like the idea you have 6 that are out there. You know, I don't have these in any particular ranking, but I'd like to see them. I think this would, you know, eliminate 3/4 of the proposed maps and give us and the public, the people who are going to weigh in, a much more clearer choice, a much more narrow choice. So we are making some choices tonight, but I'd rather see, you know, 6 instead of 2. Because I don't, you know, I think we all need to study these a little more. One of the beauties of having 5 or 6 meetings is you kind of hone down what's going to be your preference. So I don't know if you need anything further from me in terms of straw polling, but
No.
I mean, I think what Councilmember Healy said about bringing back the 6 or 7, I think it is 6 at this point.
I think we're at 6 right now.
Makes a lot of sense.
And I'm going to repeat it just for everybody to make sure we're on the same page. A2, districting, NH1, Dusty, and idea consolidation 1 and 2. Did anybody feel like something they wanted didn't get in there? Councilmember Barnacle.
Yeah, I had a request for sort of a hybrid map that had basically districts 1, 2, and 3 from districting plan. I really like those. And then, so keeping those 3 sort of just how they are potentially, or with some minor tweaks. And then taking something that looks more like Dusty's plan on the east side. So making 4, 5, and 6 have one district and that's on the outer side, and then 2 districts on the inner piece of it.
Right.
Is it possible? Yeah. So I'm just wondering if there's another person on the council who'd like to see that
I think
hybrid.
Councilmember McDonald also was sort of on that same page, at least with part of districting being that he thought Dusty did better on the west side or east side and districting on the west side. I can't remember exactly which one he said, but yes, those are the maps that we're looking at. So how those come back, I think I was just getting the maps down, and then I was going to go back to, you know, the pushing and shoving that both Healy and King mentioned, you know, like, you know, you push here and then something comes out there. That is, you know, you're trying to say you want those, how they push and shove come to look like that. And I think Councilmember McDonald also said that. There's interest only by 2 people who are taking a position on east side, north, south. There's 2 that want it north, south, and 2 that want it east, west. So, and the other 3 want to just see what happens. And that's good for staff to know, that there's not a majority on any of those positions. But let me just turn over to staff and the consultant and see, do you have questions of us that we have not given you enough direction on?
Mayor, I just wanted to
Yes.
clarify. I know that I heard from at least 5 of you about wanting lower deviations. Is that only on map A2 or is that?
All maps. I think
All maps.
we want the map we vote for, and please raise your hand if I'm not saying this correctly, to be tighter rather than looser. But we also want to see where the changes have been made. So we want to see whether we think that is too much a sacrifice to get the tighter numbers.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Questions of us? Oh, yes. I'm sorry, Tom. Go ahead.
Mayor, thank you. I just wanted just a follow-up question from the city manager on total deviation. I believe at least 1 or 2 city council members suggested a total deviation of 5%. So in other words, if you see Dusty and Dusty is at 7%, and then coming back with like a Dusty 2 that is under 5%, is there a hard total deviation that you want to achieve in that second tightening process? I think I heard 5% total deviation, but I don't know if that's a consensus, but I thought that should probably be clarified.
Okay, so if I can restate your question, because I think this is something I had not really thought about before you're asking the question, and maybe other council members have. Are council members interested just in the total deviation? I mean, if there's one district that is like 8% different than the other, but the whole difference in the maps is 5% or less, are you comfortable with that? I'm not so comfortable with that, but like was said by several of the council members, it depends on the trade-off. You know, so yes, I think we want to see as close 5 or less for a total, and you know, there have to be a really good argument being made for why one district might have a bigger deviation than the others, but that's where the policy just gets made. Okay, Councilmember King.
I agree with you
Okay,
on that.
good.
I just wanted to, I don't know if anybody else did.
Yeah, I saw a few
That's
hands nodding. Yeah. I saw a couple more. So that's at least 4 of us are on that page.
Right, and I did want to weigh in on what Councilmember Barnacle just requested a few moments ago about the hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
I will join him and say, I'll take a look at that too.
Yeah.
Make that the 7th map. I think there was a couple people who kind of made comments along those lines, and I'm certainly fine with looking at that, seeing what it looks like.
And I thought that Councilmember McDonald was saying something like that too. He wasn't, it was a little bit more impressionistic, but again, I just think by giving staff the direction that these are the maps that we think work, then those are the bits that staff and the consultant are going to work from to put something together. So it's just, to me, it just seems natural that you would just, borrow from one another for what's working. So, and certainly they've heard our comments. So Councilmember McDonald.
Can I invite one more straw poll?
Sure.
For your consideration? The Schoenberg area, can we straw poll that it stays east of the freeway?
That's a very good question. Do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think it's just stay east of.
East, okay.
Not tied into downtown.
I'm seeing a thumbs up from Councilmember Fisher. And does anybody else want to weigh in on this? Okay, Brian, what do you say? Yes, keep it on the east?
I think that I'm more along the river than I am along Highway 101 on the Schollenberger stuff. But I guess with a friendly amendment to suggest that the river is the divider, I would support that.
Are you okay with that? Yeah,
Yeah.
And I'm with that too. So that's at least 4 of us who think that area should be on the river, the east side of the river. Okay, and mobile home parks, does anybody want to weigh in on mobile home parks besides me and Mike? You know, Council Member Barnacle?
I support that. They should stay together.
Okay, if at all possible. Council Member King?
Yeah, yes, if at all possible.
Okay,
I agree.
okay, good. Anybody else have something else? See, this is exactly where we need to be, is just giving this kind of direction. Because we kind of all have talked about things, but you know, let's get the numbers there. So anything else that communities of interest that we think we've missed? Okay. Staff or consultant now, any more questions of us? No. Okay, well, thank
I've got a question. So you've outlined some community of interest that you want to try to keep together as much as possible on all maps coming forward. If the architecture of a plan that you've elevated isn't compatible with all of the COI decisions, would you want us to completely change the architecture of the plan or to fit those straw poll decisions, or point out the map? Like, I don't know if this is true, but let's say Dusty can't unify all the mobile home parks in its architecture. Would you rather us leave that as it is and point it out, or try to change it so that it does comply with keeping all the mobile home parks together?
Okay, well, I know what I would like, but let's, Councilmember King has his hand up.
Well, it was on something completely unrelated to that. So I'll put my hand down for the moment.
Okay, Councilmember McDonald.
I would rather that the nature of the mapping didn't change. I think, particularly with mobile homes, we have one very south, very north, and it would be a spaghetti farm, a very long, skinny thing to try and make one district. It would defeat the Dusty purpose. Okay. That's an extreme, because you picked an extreme one, the very north and the very south. That's an answer.
And I guess I would say that it would be good if you came back with the information of how many of the mobile home parks can you keep in one district? And what kind of, you know, is it a simple change to get more, almost all of them in? I don't think Little Woods is ever going to get in with the rest of them. But, you know, that's something that, you know, you could say the sacrifice is too great. You know, you just get this long line coming down. But it looks like an easy fix, and you want to just do an A and B. That's what you get paid for.
Yeah, I just don't want to. I want to provide what you guys are calling for, and I just want to just be very. We're all on the same page.
Okay. So Councilmember Fisher, is this a question or are you weighing in?
I'm weighing in because I have a question. So draft plan A2, then should that still come forward, since we just said we don't want a district on both sides of the river, and that is?
Well, let them look at it.
Well, we try to basically conform A2 to those outlines and basically point out this is possible or this isn't, and then hopefully with the 7 plans that are going to come forward in a slightly different look, people will like a couple of those, and then we can keep making iterations on them.
I don't envy your job.
No.
It's fun. I love it. So
I bet, yeah.
We'll do our best to make sure that the 7 plans, or it might be more like 10, because we might have, you know, Dusty 2 and 3 or whatever, that when they come before you, you have different looks and feels and architecture, so that you have all the options out there to then maybe get to 3 for the next, you know, 2 meetings ahead.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember King.
Thank you. My comment from before was a request. When the maps come back, one of the things I really like looking at on idea consolidations 1 and 2 were the clarity of the, you know, listing the parks and the schools and some other landmarks. It made trying to figure out where everything was a lot easier for the the reader. And the overlays in the presentation tonight where you did the same thing. Those were helpful. So my request is that whatever maps come back, have those types of things on there. You know, the roads on the barriers and, you know, and if you're going to factor in mobile home parks, where the mobile home parks are in each of the districts and so forth. To the degree it doesn't look like, you know, it's everything's covered, but I mean, just enough to really get a sense of where the boundaries are.
Okay, thank you. That's good. That's good direction. Councilmember Healy.
Thank you. I actually had a question for the attorneys. When this comes back next time, are we going to be tasked with selecting one of the ones that's on the table, or can we continue this ping pong game indefinitely and say, change this, change that? At what point do we have to pick one that's being presented?
Well, the time you really need to pick one is when you're introducing an ordinance. You could go into that meeting with more than one map as long as we've published them 7 days before.
But we have to pick one of the maps that were published 7 days before.
Correct. Tom, do you want to change anything about that? But I think that's
No, that's correct. As long as when you by March 21, when you make that decision, that map that you choose has to have been published 7 days before, at least.
Okay, and so we have how many more meetings before that on this topic? Just one?
Yes.
I think you have March 7th and March 2021, correct?
So one more shot at the end. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And when you say published 7 days ahead, that means no changes at the, well,
Yes.
in this meeting.
That's right. So in other words, if March 21, you saw a map that you love, but you think it needs one more tweak, you would then have to do that 7 days later at a different meeting, and then you're up against a deadline with your CVRA deadline. So.
Okay, thank you. So, so that means that the meeting on the 7th of March is, you know, when Councilmember Posake you said you just want to divide it up and do a pie. You've got to pick your slice of pie on that day. Okay, all right, good. All right, so no further questions or comments. We've given as much direction as we can. And I really do want to reiterate what I think several of the council members have said. We get that this is a difficult task. And I'm glad you enjoy it, Mr. Chafee, because I wouldn't want to send you home, you know, to just frustration. But, you know, it is very frustrating for us to make decisions that are going to be in place for the next 10 years for the voters of Petaluma. And so we want to be sure we're getting it right, and we want to be very conscientious about that. And all of us, I think, have mentioned how much we appreciate the public's weighing in and submitting work. I mean, it's a lot, and we really do appreciate it. And we look forward to what you are going to submit back to us for our March 7th meeting. So with that, I will see if there is any general public comment on items that are not on this agenda. See if the city clerk has received anything.
And Mayor, the city received 5 public comments that have been posted to the agenda online.
Thank you. And so I'll see if our moderator can see if there's anybody in attendance who would like to speak on non-agendized items.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At this time, we are opening it up to general public comments. So these are for items not on the current agenda. If there are 20 members in the audience currently, I'm going to set a 30-second timer, and we will count how many hands we have raised and divide the time accordingly, either between 2 or 3 minutes. So there we go. General public comment is for items that are not on the current agenda and within the City Council's subject matter jurisdiction. If you wish to speak in general public comment, please raise your hand in Zoom, and we'll call on you in turn. Attendees will be muted when their time expires, when their comments have concluded, whichever comes first. Speakers are encouraged to be respectful. Threats of violence and obscenity are grounds for removal from the meeting. And if you're unable to speak during the time allotted, please send your comments to cityclerk@cityofpetaluma.org. I see one hand raised, so I will reset the timer to 3 minutes. And ask Theresa Payne Lyons to speak. Theresa, you may unmute and begin your comments.
Yes, I was just wondering, it seems like the city council and everybody who's spoken is white and middle class. Where is the non-white, non-middle class representation in all of this?
Is that your comment, Theresa?
Yes,
Okay.
comment and question.
Okay, thank you for that comment. And that is the last hand raised, so I will turn it back to you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And with that, we will close general public comment and thank everybody for participating and say adjourn tonight's meeting. So good night, everybody.
Night, everyone.
No, thank you.